this meeting to order. My name is John Mirsky, and as chair of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission, I'm calling the meeting to order, and I am participating from my home here in Ann Arbor. I'd like to welcome everyone to this evening's meeting of the electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. This virtual meeting is to affect social distancing and to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We will conduct this meeting as we would an in-person meeting. Commissioners, during the roll call, please indicate your current location. And during the meeting, please remain on camera, just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Also, please mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, one at the beginning and one at the end of the meeting, please call one of the following toll-free numbers: 877-853-5247 or 888-788-099 and enter the meeting ID number 937-6751-6819 on your phone. These numbers will remain the same the entire rest of the year for the Energy Commission. This meeting, along with two local dial-in numbers, actually the local dial-in numbers have been dropped. So these two numbers are available on the published agenda, in the public notices section of the city website, on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN, and on Ann Arbor channel, and on CTN channel 16 and AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. With those formalities aside, Missy, would you please lead us through the land acknowledgement statement?
Absolutely, Chair Mirsky. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you. Next, Missy, would you also take the roll call?
Yes, and just a reminder, if you could please state the community in which you're joining us from. Commissioner Hookham.
Present in the Ann Arbor Consultant's Office in south side of Ann Arbor tonight.
Commissioner McComber.
Joining from my house in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Clevey.
Joining from my solar house in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Levin.
I am joining from my house in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Chair Mirsky.
Join here and joining from my net zero house in Ann Arbor.
Wow, look at this, it's competition, I like it. Vice Chair Colvin Garcia.
Carlene, you are muted.
Joining from my house with solar panels in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner McCoy.
Joining from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner George.
Joining from Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Kerber.
Joining from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Overpeck. Okay. Commissioner June.
Here, joining from my home in Ann Arbor.
Great. Commissioner Stevenson.
Here and joining from Ann Arbor.
All right. Councilmember Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor. Unfortunately, my camera continues to not work, and I'm going to see if I can get it sorted out on another computer, but still no luck.
Okay. And Councilmember Radina.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Great. And let me just make sure Overpeck didn't join us. I don't see him. So you have a quorum, Chair Mirsky.
Great. I should just qualify my statement. I do have a propane grill. And I have a gas fireplace that I use a dozen times a year, and my Volt runs on gasoline 5% of the time. So I'm not quite to net zero. Great. Okay, but we can certainly continue the competition here. That's a good thing. Leading by example through the Energy Commission. Thanks, Mark, for starting it off. We have an agenda that's posted on Legistar. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda followed by a second?
I so moved.
A second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? It passes unanimously. The agenda is approved. We also have meeting minutes posted under the date of the last meeting. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to review those. Do I also have a motion to approve the minutes followed by a second?
So moved.
Thank you, Robert. Second, someone?
Second.
Thank you, Bridget. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or any concerns, any abstentions? That passes also unanimously. So we are now at public input. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 937-6751-6819. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet place and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Let us know if and when calls come in.
John, I'm getting messages that it's not being streamed on CTN, that it's playing something else.
There is, I think Travis and Eric, aren't there some concurrent sessions of other council meetings or other things like that that may be?
We will likely have to pop off briefly at about 7 because we do have a meeting with DDA at 7. I'm probably going to come back to this one rather than staying there, and I'll watch that later. But that does not start until 7, so I'm not.
Can somebody check the CTN schedule? It's on the city's website.
You can check. We have CTN with us, so I know that they are recording and doing what they would normally do.
Right.
So I can check. And I don't know if our colleague from CTN wants to pop in. I doubt they do.
CTN publishes a schedule of which meetings are being broadcast. Didn't check
Yeah.
It looks like the government channel is playing like an art show. I just turned it on.
I don't. Sorry, my internet's wonky. I don't know that I can do anything about this one. I can make a phone call on the side and see what's happening.
I wonder if because the council meeting's beginning at 7, there was a conflict because it would be going longer.
Although you would think the first hour of our meeting would be broadcast. We'll wait for Missy to clarify. She's on the phone.
Can you hear me? Oh,
Yes.
sorry. My internet's a little wonky. I will make a phone call on the side, but I don't know that there's anything that we are going to be capable of doing with CTN with us.
Okay.
Yeah. It is being recorded for sure, But maybe we can start public comment and I'll try to make a phone call.
Yeah, let's do that. Missy, can you recognize people that are calling in?
Yep, absolutely. So caller ending in 820.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hi, my name is Phil Bianco. I am a resident of Ann Arbor in Ward 1. And I'm calling today just to, I guess, reiterate my support for public power in Ann Arbor for a municipal energy utility. And particularly at this point, for the Energy Commission to recommend to the council that they do a feasibility study so that the city and so that the residents and voters of this city can know what it's going to take to make public power happen in Ann Arbor, what it's going to cost, how it could work, what the different options are, and what the different pitfalls are. So I just wanted to call in to express my support for both public power and the part of it that is recommending a feasibility study to the council. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And just to address them briefly, City Council has asked that we weigh in on the matter by the end of the year, and I expect that we will do so.
And Chair Mirsky, while we have more folks, I did get confirmation from CTN that due to the special meeting of City Council, they are not airing live. So totally unforeseen, as some of you know, City Council's meeting to discuss the contract for a new city administrator, which I think, I'm sorry, everyone, but I don't think we can fix that. Caller ending in 818.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Great. My name is Chris Lewis. I live in Ward 5 on 7th Street. I also wanted to call in and express my support for a feasibility study on creating a municipal utility. I think given all of the recent outages that we've had with DTE, it's clear that the company is not meeting all of the needs of the city. And given that DTE has opposed some renewable energy initiatives, it's also clear that its practices are not consistent with the values that a lot of the residents of Ann Arbor have. So I think it's really important that the city fully explore and understand all the options that it has and the possibility of public power as an alternative. And so to do that, I think it's essential to do a feasibility study that especially addresses the costs of acquiring DTE's assets, revenue and operating costs of the municipal utility, and whether there will be enough excess revenue to service the debt from acquiring DTE's infrastructure. Also wanted to point out that municipalization doesn't have to be a really long process. Negotiations in Jefferson County, Washington, they just took 2 years. And Maine is expecting the negotiations to be 3 to 4 years for the whole state. So I think this is really a chance for Ann Arbor both to be a leader in reducing its own emissions, but also in being a leader in saying no to companies that profit off of reducing or profit off carbon emissions and threaten all of our futures. And so a feasibility study is the next step for making that happen. Thanks.
Thank you for your input and your insights.
Caller ending in 998.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hello, my name is Zachariah Farron. I know I've called in a few times before. I'm a student, an undergraduate student here at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, studying biochemistry and German, and I'm a pre-med student actually. And I'm also really involved in student government, and it's unfortunately become an increasingly common thing that we have to discuss these outages that keep happening. When we have these constant outages in our city, students can't log in to do their homework, they can't do their exams that are online, they can't go to office hours in many cases. And that's just unacceptable, I think, especially when we have people who've lived their whole lives in this city, their families have saved up lots of money just so they can put their kids through college. And when the time comes, because we have this shoddy service, DTE, the kids are just, these students are missing out on their education, which is going to have long-standing impacts. And beyond that, one of the things I love the most about living here is all the really awesome businesses and restaurants we have. Just the other day, I was walking back by one of my favorite restaurants, Asian Legend, and they had to shut down. Why? Because they had an outage. Well, DTE had an outage, and they just couldn't make any food, so they just had no customers for that day. Now, that's completely unacceptable, and the alternative to shutting down for the day is running a gas generator the whole day. And so if you have the entire city doing that, if we're all, switching over to just gas generators, then we are definitely not going to meet the 8 to 0 goals. And I am truly deeply committed to the 8 to 0 goals as an individual. I think a lot of students are. I've been going to a lot of the events, and one I went to recently was about heat pumps, electric heat pumps, and getting residents to switch over to electric heating rather than gas heating. And that's great. I was really dead set, right after that really cool informative event to convince my family to do that, to convince my dad to switch over. And when I talked to him about it, he said, well, that sounds great, but what happens when there's an outage in the winter? And I didn't really have a good answer for him because, you know what, he loses heating. And that's kind of that's just unacceptable in the state where we know we can get down to -40 wind chill. So it's, again, really difficult to imagine a future where we're still with DTE in its current form and we're still hitting 8 to 0 goals. I really think, I strongly believe that we need to fund this feasibility study so we can at least have some answers here, have more information so we can fully explore this option of switching over to public power. I strongly support this idea. And I think once we have this information from the feasibility study, which I believe we should fund as soon as possible, I mean, we've been calling it for almost a year now, I think we can make a very confident decision. Is this a good idea for Ann Arbor? Should we have public power here? From what I see right now, I think, my answer, I believe it's a good idea. But until we get that feasibility study funded, we're just not going to be able to answer with
10
confidence to all
seconds.
these residents who are calling it. And I think that we want to give them a good, confident answer. So please fund this feasibility study as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Just clarifying, also people with natural gas lose power during an outage. So caller ending in 037.
Hello, am I coming in?
Yes, we hear you.
Fantastic. All right, my name is Aiden Terhune. I live 412 Hamilton Place in Ann Arbor. I'm a graduate student here at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and I am also, like many others, calling in to voice my support for the municipalization of public power. All the people who have called in already have brought up some excellent points about how this is a huge thing for meeting our goals for, reducing energy or reducing emissions and whatnot. But I think another part of it that is critically important is the fact that, reaching those goals to mitigate our effect on the climate is awfully important, obviously. But we're also at a point where the effects of climate change are already here in Michigan, and especially across the United States. I mean, we saw what was happening with Texas with their non-robust energy infrastructure in the winter. And, when I saw that, I was like, well, maybe we'll have some time before those effects really come up to Michigan. But we've seen over the summer the flooding that has been happening. We've seen how it's affected Detroit because the infrastructure wasn't robust enough that it wasn't able to handle this change in climate. I work in the tenants union quite extensively, and I've been to a lot of places in Ypsi where the flooding has been disastrous for a lot of families, and it's taken away livelihoods. We need robust infrastructure here in Ann Arbor. And as you've already said, power, especially when those winters get cold, is extremely important. We need to make sure that we have an actual robust and controllable energy infrastructure that is run by and for Ann Arbor. DTE is a publicly traded company. They answer to their shareholders only. That's just how that is. They have no investment in the people of Ann Arbor. They could care less as a company. And I'm sure there's individuals from DTE are caring individuals, but as a company, as its own entity, it does not care about Ann Arbor the way that we, the people of Ann Arbor, care about Ann Arbor, the way that we care about and take care of one another. And, we are staring down the barrel of climate change. It's already here, and it's already having disastrous effects on the people of our community. We need to do something about it. If we want to make a robust community and take care of one another, this is how we do it. like just doing a feasibility study
seconds.
is the least that we can do. Is that 10-second warning?
30 seconds.
I heard someone say 30 seconds. Okay. I mean, that's really all I had to say. Like, we need this for the future. Like, the people of Ann Arbor depend on municipalization. Lives and livelihoods will be taken away if we don't. So please at least do the feasibility study. If nothing else, at least the feasibility study. Thank you.
Caller ending in 632.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amir. I live in Water Hill. So I just want to call in support of public power and, of course, the feasibility study as the first step to getting there. Yeah, I'll also add that I'm a GEO member and a grad student. So electricity is what you might call a natural monopoly, where there's really only going to be one service provider that's capable of providing the system we need to get electricity. So because it's a natural monopoly, we get no supposed benefits of the free market here. There is no competition, there's no consumer choice, and there is virtually nothing that incentivizes DTE to be a better utility. Nobody should be profiting off our basic needs. I don't have a choice whether or not I need electricity. I don't have a choice whether or not I need water. And I don't have a choice whether or not I need the internet. I need them. And I have no options in the kind of service I'm getting or any elasticity in my demand. So the residents of Ann Arbor deserve power at cost or to have the revenue reinvested in the community. Only public ownership will be able to provide that for us. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, and we have public power generation, and it is great. We've had it for more than a century. And you know what? The politician who nationalized public power generation in Ontario, a conservative politician, I might add, he has a statue in downtown Toronto, if that's how much people love our public power generation. I'll add that in terms of climate change, having public power generation has allowed Ontario to completely eliminate coal-fired plants. We get most of our power from hydroelectricity and from nuclear, with only a very small fraction from fossil fuels, natural gas. So we're far and away ahead of most states in this country in terms of green power generation. This is a really unique opportunity for Ann Arbor. I really hope that we support the feasibility study so that we know how best to achieve this incredible thing that we have on the table right. Thanks very much.
Caller ending in 121.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I am a student in the area. I'm just calling in to, like many other people, talk about the feasibility support, and I hope that y'all recommend to the energy, or not to the Energy Commission, but to City Council for a feasibility study. Specifically, what I want to see is a feasibility study that requires the cost of acquiring infrastructure, what that revenue generated from the municipality would be, what the expenses would be for the Muni campaign, or not for the campaign, but for the Muni itself, and would there be enough excess revenue to pay off the debts of acquiring that infrastructure? I know some people have talked to this already in public comment, but I just want to reiterate my support. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the Energy Commission does. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Caller ending in 809.
Hi, can you hear me?
You.
Hi, my name is Sophie Chattis, and I live in Ward 1 on Ingle Street. And like many others before me, I'm calling because I care deeply about climate change and think that it's crucially important for us to act now. Switching to public power in Ann Arbor will allow us to invest in renewable energy and significantly decrease our carbon emissions. So like others, I'm asking the Commission to support a feasibility study so that we can take the necessary steps toward creating a municipal utility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller ending in 119.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We do.
Great, thanks. Hi, my name's Bethany. I'm also calling in from Ward 1. I'm a graduate student here at the University of Michigan. Also a involved GEO member and the chair of our climate caucus. But I'm originally from Seattle, and I really want to echo what everyone else has been saying, but also I wanted to share my perspective as someone from the Puget Sound region, where we've also had a public energy utility since 1902. And just comment on a couple of the differences that I've seen. For one thing, there's a huge difference between what I pay for electricity here as opposed to back home. So Seattle residents pay an average of about 10 cents per kilowatt hour of energy. Here in Ann Arbor, we're paying like around 14, which is exceptionally striking when you consider the fact that, for instance, housing prices are anywhere between 20 and 60% higher in Seattle. So that makes that difference look a lot more profound. But also, maybe more importantly, Seattle City Light has always been about a lot more than supplying power. I think they offer up a really inspiring example of what it can mean when an energy utility becomes more than that, when it becomes part of a community and it embodies and reflects that community's goals and values. So we see them collaborating with Indigenous tribes, with other local organizations, and being able to set and reach common goals. So for instance, they were the first utility in the nation to achieve carbon neutral operations. They have the longest running conservation program in the nation. They're recognized leaders in environmental stewardship. They're really at the cutting edge of science and sustainability. And I look around me at my peers, my colleagues at the university, my neighbors, and I just think, like, why aren't we there yet? We have this amazing community of people who are invested in the planet, obviously, all these people calling in. And also we're invested in each other, and we should just be doing so much more. And it's disappointing to me, and it's frustrating. And frankly, it's confusing that Ann Arbor lags so spectacularly on this front. So I'd really like to add my voice to those strongly urging the Energy Commission to support this feasibility study, because I want an energy utility that has my financial and ethical interests in mind, and I don't think that's ever going to be DTE. I think a public power utility is really the way forward. So thanks for taking my call.
Thank you for calling in.
Caller ending in 083.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hi, this is Keith Button. I'm calling in from Ward 1. On Detroit Street, I actually just got married, and my wife and I are looking to settle down and live in Ann Arbor long term. And a part of that would be living in a place that we can find support with the energy sources. So obviously I'm calling in support of the feasibility study. During our honeymoon, we were venturing out into California, and it really put into perspective how urgent the current climate crisis is, going into beautiful places like Yosemite National Park and not being able to see about 1,000-foot cliffs due to the smoke from burning sequoias. And obviously, I believe that DTE does not provide the urgency, or is not aware of the urgency of this crisis, or is not capable of handling this. Just within the past several years, for example, they invested almost $3 billion in shale gas infrastructure, and has an additional $1 billion natural gas plant coming online in St. Clair in 2022. Had they invested this in renewables, they could have grown their portfolio to almost 25%, but still it sits at about 10%. In contrast, publicly owned utilities are about 40% renewable energy sources. So going forward, I would like to, start a future in a town that is consistent with my values and can set an example for the rest of Michigan by democratizing energy sources and allowing us to move forward in a carbon neutral fashion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller ending in 136.
Hello, can you hear me?
We do, yes.
Hi, my name is Mahnur Imran, and I am an undergraduate public policy student at the University of Michigan. I live here in Ann Arbor, and I do a lot of organizing work in Asian American student communities here. I am also calling to urge the Energy Commission to support a feasibility study for public power in the city of Ann Arbor. Like the other callers tonight, I believe that municipalizing our energy infrastructure must be an urgent priority. It's a way for us to provide our community with reliable, affordable, and environmentally sustainable energy. It, of course, gives residents a direct voice in decision-making about rates and sources of electricity, and of course, is entirely aligned with the goals of our city's A20 plan. So many students like myself are passionate about public power being a means to pursue that plan, and there is very clearly growing excitement around this idea. We are constantly experiencing power outages, and people are rightfully frustrated. There are real equity concerns here too. When power outages occur, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommend that you throw all perishable food in the fridge after 4 hours without power. For lower income people, the financial burden of restocking a fridge and/or freezer is felt most strongly. It can cost quite a lot of money, and that's just one example. The reality is that DTE has profoundly failed our community. In our current for-profit system, decisions about how to generate energy are made by wealthy executives who care more about creating profit for their shareholders and less about providing a safe, affordable, and clean energy supply. They charge us as much as they can while investing as little as they can get away with. Moreover, DTE's dependence on and investment in fossil fuels are unacceptable when we are facing the prodigious threat of climate change. We don't have time to wait around for corporate behavior to marginally improve. We need to overhaul what is very clearly not working and chart a new path forward. The feasibility study is one step to figuring out how we can best do that. The people of Ann Arbor deserve true energy justice and environmental justice. And it's time that our city places the interests of our community above the interests of a corporate monopoly. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you for calling in.
Caller ending in 127.
Hi there, you can hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Anna Wysocki. I live in Ward 3 and I've lived here a few years. I've found a lot of community here. I'm actually stepping out of my evening class to call in today because I wholeheartedly agree with those who spoke before me. I support municipalization. I'm afraid that the minimal amount of green energy we'll receive through DTE will be inadequate and probably superficial. It also seems to me that municipalization will help create more stable union jobs and will help diversify our economy in Ann Arbor. I also support funding a feasibility study. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller ending in 278.
Hello, this is Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Is the city not tired? Thank you. Is the city not tired of being blamed for DTE's failures? For-profit DTE failures cause outages all over the city, disarming alarms, traffic lights, toilets. Peoples in crisis feel angry and afraid. For-profit DTE does not prioritize quality control. Why should they? They have the city over a barrel. Energy is a must. Profit-driven industries gift outsized salaries to incompetent people to curry favors. They have no interest in hiring experienced, qualified personnel or in infrastructure maintenance, because when the grid fails, Ann Arbor's captive market doesn't hold them responsible. When people pay outage costs of replacing groceries, batteries, and fuel, and go without running water and home oxygen machines and internet, they blame the city. They look to the city for their care, and they hold the city responsible, right or wrong, when things go wrong, and ask, can't the city do anything about this? Stop taking the blame for the profit-driven utility that you have no control over. The power utility is the nervous system of a city. Of course that should be controlled by the city. Relieve your people's burdens imposed by the for-profit DTE. The grid is integral to the safety and the savings of all of Ann Arbor's people who depend on you and their city to ensure that there is a stable energy system in place. You've got one way of doing that with any certainty. Don't take the blame, take control of the grid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller ending in 537.
Hi, Commission. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hi, my name's Mike Rose. I'm a nuclear engineer. I live over on Fairview Drive near Veterans Memorial Park. I think that municipalizing the power grid of Ann Arbor should be feasible because Ann Arbor is a relatively wealthy place and DTE is not providing a good service. When we had that storm in August that was relatively mild, it knocked out their service across Southeast Michigan. I personally was out of power for 5 days. I'm lucky enough to have an electric generator, so I could keep my food cooled for about $6 a day, but obviously a lot less fortunate people can't do that, which is a good point the other caller made. Also, there was a power pole that fell down on Merrifield Drive that didn't get replaced for about 3 weeks, even though the replacement pole was sitting there. So they just kind of tied the power line to a tree for about 3 weeks. I think it's silly to have an outside investor-owned company in control of a city's power grid. I think if we had municipal power, they could either provide a more robust power grid and or lower the cost of electricity. So that's why I support municipalization. Thank you.
Caller ending in 677.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello? Okay, cool. Hello, my name is Kevin Fay. I'm a remote worker here living in Ann Arbor on South Forest Avenue, Ward 3. I'm here to also call to express my support for municipal power in Ann Arbor and, of course, the feasibility study to investigate it. So I actually recently moved to Ann Arbor and had the unfortunate experience of attempting to hook up a DTE to our home. What should have been a simple process took almost 2 weeks and over 5 phone calls to set up because their computer system had some sort of glitch in it that they just couldn't fix. And every time we call back, we have to re-explain the problem. And it was just such a headache for a simple issue. And I think this is symptomatic of one of the issues with having DTE being our power provider, which is that they don't have the incentive to invest in their services in their community in the same way a municipalized or city-owned power company would have. I previously lived in New York City, where Con Edison is the power supplier, and it's one of the largest investor-run power companies, has so many problems. There are so many outages due to summer heat, and after hurricanes hit, they would be super slow to restore power to many communities, and like people would just be hanging out there, and they would have nothing. So yeah, I think municipalization would really be able to help focus the money that DTE is doing right now to either give back to their investors or to spend on political lobbying to prevent municipalization from happening. All this money would instead be going to investing in our community, in the power, in the infrastructure, and all of these things rather than to profit. So yeah, once again, go municipal power, go feasibility study, and thank you very much.
Caller ending in 347.
Hello, my name is Desiree Simmons. I am actually not an Ann Arbor resident. I live in the city of Ypsilanti, but I do work in Ann Arbor with the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice. I am calling in support of the feasibility study for a couple of reasons and across a couple of roles that I play. One, the IPCC report makes clear that we need to address energy directly in a very short period of time. And the plans from DTE, which uses over 60% of coal, their timeline is already too little, too late. Yesterday, I was able to hear from a member of Ann Arbor for Public Power in my role as a sustainability commissioner in the city of Ypsilanti. And I just say that to say that we know that even though this is in Ann Arbor, that we cannot ignore the ways that Ann Arbor and the city of Ypsilanti are connected in a lot of times really problematic ways, but this is a possibility for maybe something that could be more positive for our community here. And in that, during that presentation, I learned some things that I thought were important that I just want to name that I asked about or had questions about. I'd seen that we haven't had municipalization here in the state of Michigan since the early 1900s, and that was really a concern for folks. And it was helpful to learn about some of the reasons why that is in terms of misunderstandings of the law, and that might have stopped people from trying, which is exactly what a company, a corporation like DTE and Other Energy would try to do. And so I think that was helpful to learn. Also, I asked about, the cost around having to buy old infrastructure. And obviously, no matter what, there would be some kind of cost around infrastructure, whether you're building your own or having to repair, and recognizing the really poor conditions of the DTE infrastructure, but also recognizing that
10 seconds.
Not having them in there actually could help with for some of those legal battles, and also thinking about the jobs and opportunities for economic mobility is just so important. So thank you. Let's try to start this. Bye.
Caller ending in 543.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, my name is Navdeep Kaur, and I am a student here at the University of Michigan, an undergrad. And so to take a step in combating the greatest crisis of our time, climate change, and really to set a precedent for many other cities all around the country, I want to show my support for municipalization in Ann Arbor. DTE has not been receptive whatsoever to seriously tackling the urgency of climate change because they've been profiting off this dirty power. They're profiting at the cost of all of our futures. And I'm tired of getting told to reduce, reuse, recycle our way out of the climate crisis when DTE continues to pollute our environment. And it's frustrating that it's 2021. We know climate change is escalating. We know that we only have a handful of years to do something about it, but yet DTE is doing nothing. I don't want DTE to jeopardize my future or the future of my community here in Ann Arbor. And so we need to take steps to combat climate change. And this feasibility study is really the bare minimum at this point because we are running out of time and DTE does not care. So I really, really hope that we can get this feasibility study running because we need to find a way to tackle the climate crisis. And I know many other young people across Ann Arbor would agree with me because it's our futures at risk. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you.
Caller ending in 806.
Hi, my name is Paul Coleman. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I don't really know much about Ann Arbor or your utility or Michigan laws or anything like that, but I've been involved in the citizen effort in Boulder to have a municipal utility. So I think I can speak to this and add to the discussion. I support municipalization of electric supply. Local control of your power supply is crucial. It gives you flexibility, innovation, and of course, lets you clean up your electric supply. The other thing, the revenue stream from a municipal utility is key. That revenue stream allows you to do so many things that you can't do now. Not having the revenue stream really limits what you can do as a city in terms of getting to 100% renewable electricity, cleaning up your electricity supply. Having that revenue stream allows you to have innovation, have local development. It helps the local economy. There's just nothing bad about it. On the flip side, though, the incumbent utilities, which I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure they will fight with everything they have. You are an existential threat. This is life and death for the utility. So you need to learn from Boulder's mistakes. Mistakes were made. And I don't know if Jonathan Cohen covered too much about the mistakes we made, but you need to dig into that and find out what we did wrong because we were just kind of feeling our way along, didn't really have a roadmap in front of us, and we made a lot of wrong turns and still made progress. So you can learn from what Boulder did, even though we didn't succeed. So I wish you the best of luck. I really hope you succeed. Thank you.
Thanks for calling in so much.
Caller ending in 183.
Hi there. My name is Ashley Stressler. I am a resident in Ward 1. And I was one of those people that lost power for 4 days this summer. And in that time, I think it became very clear to me that power is an equity issue. During that time, my partner and I both lost income because the restaurants we worked were shut down for at least part of that time. We lost food in our fridge that we couldn't afford to replace. And I have a chronic illness and I got put into critical condition because I didn't have access to equipment that helps me mitigate the effects of my illness. And so I'm just calling because I want the feasibility study to be done. And while it's being done, I just want people like me to be remembered. That is all.
Thank you for sharing your experience.
That is all public comment.
Great. I think I can say on behalf of the entire Energy Commission, we appreciate all of the callers being engaged on this issue. And we encourage you to continue to be engaged, not only on this issue, but on other energy and climate related issues going forward. So thanks very much for calling in and sharing your insights.
Chair Mirsky, since the time that you gave that little introduction, 2 more hands have come up. So I don't know if you want to go backwards or you want to move forward.
Sure.
The caller ending in 217.
sorry about that. I never called in before. My name is Emily. I live in Ward 5. I've lived in Ann Arbor my whole life. I am also calling in support of public power. Well, to just, reiterate a lot of things that other people have said in support, especially, my parents, my grandparents live here. This past summer, they've all been left. My confusion that other callers have brought up as to why we aren't looking into this yet, why we're waiting until the end of the year to make a recommendation to council, because to me, we are in a rather desperate situation, and I don't understand. There are so many concerns that I hear being raised about public power and how much would it cost? Can the city afford it? How would it affect the grid? And it's all based on speculation. And when we have this feasibility study on the table, ready to be recommended, I'm really not interested in speculation. I would like to know, is this the right thing for our community? And we want to talk about priorities. Just looking at the city budget, I know things are tight, but the number I've seen quoted for the feasibility study is $150,000 to $275,000. Well, that's about 0.5% of the police budget. So I feel like we could probably find the money, and this is something that the community desperately needs. This is something where DTE's low quality service is, as you've heard from callers tonight, actively putting members of our community in danger and putting their health at risk. And this is really a place where I think we need to step up, and I would really support you making this recommendation to council. Thank you.
Thank you. You have one more call, Missy?
Nope, you have a few more. Caller ending in 861.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Sam Copy. I'm calling from Ward 2 in the city of Ann Arbor. And I just wanted to call and thank all the energy commissioners for your attention and time in looking into everything today. I haven't looked at the agenda closely. I'm looking at the proposals relating to public power. I think that's today. I haven't looked at the agenda closely. I was listening to the very wise comments that preceded mine. And I also want to thank all the previous callers for pointing out so many great things related to public power. And I'm still convinced that I think the city should conduct a feasibility study. And I would ask all the energy commissioners to keep an open mind in deliberations as to whether to recommend to city council as to whether a feasibility study be done. So thank you all very much, the energy commissioners and the people who took time out of their day to call in to voice their concerns. I want to thank everybody. I also wanted to raise another concern that reminds me of a county commission meeting I watched recently. At least one of the callers might have called into both, I'm not sure. I did try to email my city council people. I think I emailed my county commissioner and carbon copied my city council people here in the second ward. And I would really like to be able to see Washtenaw County Board of Commission meetings on TV. I'm not sure why that's not possible. And I would love to be able to see Energy Commission meetings on TV. I know there's channels 17, 18, and 19, which I think are also one's education, one's something else. It would be great to be able to see that. And if it's not possible to get on TV, someone mentioned that CPN is there. So if they're taping it, I'm wondering if it's possible. I'm guessing it might be, if it could be broadcast to the web so people could watch this live. So if people are talking to you, even though we can't be in person because it's not safe, we can at least see your reactions to what we're saying, whether it looks like you're listening or not. So thank you all very much. thank you all for your time. And I would, I guess, the people who are listening, perhaps, unless they're at the city council meeting, if Councilmember Briggs and Councilmember Radina are still on, I would ask that they look into why the Energy Commission can't be broadcast live video. And my, I had one other point that I lost. So I will thank you all for your time. Have a good evening.
Just clarifying for anyone calling in, normally we do broadcast. It's just because of the council meeting that it's not being broadcast today. Caller ending in 060.
Hello, my name is Ingrid Peterson. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. I've been a resident of Ann Arbor since the late 70s, and I'm calling to say that I support a feasibility study. I appreciate the comments of the callers before me. 2 points: that the idea of a public utilities, not a crazy idea since we have public utilities. To me, the crazy idea is that we're putting a public need into the decision-making hands of private interests. And the fact that there's a meeting that I can call into to voice my opinion is more than I get from that private interest. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Caller ending in 354.
Can you hear me?
We do now, yes.
My name is Steve Whitaker. I'm calling from Boulder, Colorado. Like Paul, I was very much involved in the municipalization process here in Boulder. I'd like to talk a little bit about the financial aspects of that. Paul and I worked on financial modeling along with a number of other mathematicians and scientists and engineers. We worked on a model that was originally contracted to be developed by the city of Boulder. So, and then once they had the model, they used it for their purposes, but also released it to the public. And we took that over in 2020 and updated it to the current conditions and ran that model. And I am convinced that public power not only can accelerate the adoption of renewable energy, but it can do so at a substantially reduced cost. Even in our break-even scenario, which was the least optimal, we were able to see that we would have savings of $28 million after 10 years and a cumulative cash flow of $182 million when compared to what we would have to continue to pay our local utility, Xcel. So what I would advise you in Ann Arbor is to look at this all as an investment. And it is not a short-term investment. You need to look long-term, beyond 10 years. But in the end, in the long haul, you will save money, you will have control of your electric power, and you will be able to accelerate the adoption of renewable energy within Ann Arbor. I have not given up on municipalization. And the franchise agreement that we have with Xcel right now gives us the opportunity to just leave the franchise completely in 2025. So we're watching closely Xcel's performance over the next few years. And they know that if they do not perform, the citizens of Boulder can leave the franchise and again, we begin the municipalization process. So I wish you and Ann Arbor the best. This is an investment. It is a long-term investment.
30 seconds.
And it will pay off. Thank you.
Thank you for those insights.
Caller ending in 766.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. I'm calling in support of the feasibility study. My name is Joyce Stein. I'm a retired nurse and longtime resident of Ann Arbor. As Ann Arbor citizens, we do not have control over our energy supply and choices. Municipalization is the best way for us to reduce energy costs over the long run and move towards cleaner energy sources. Many communities in Michigan are already doing this. Our current energy provider has no incentive to cut costs to us, their consumers. Their business model is to make a profit. This is the time to cut our dependence on fossil fuel industries and chart our own path under our control to cleaner and cheaper energy. By moving to municipalization, we will control our profits and use this revenue, and using this revenue can go back into our community rather than to CEO salaries and shareholders. Municipalization is a way to invest in our community, to provide local control, affordable rates, reliability, and most of all, be environmentally responsible. This is a time to do it, and I can only ask you to please don't kick the can down the road. Ann Arbor is trying to move into a more environmentally responsible pathway forward. So I think this is the time to invest in this feasibility study and move our community forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all, Commissioner Mirsky.
You said that's the last one, Missy?
That's right.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks again for all those comments. We welcome our council liaisons back. Thanks very much. We are now to the core of tonight's meeting. We have presentations coming from two guests, one from Winter Park, Florida, Randy Knight, and the other from Boulder, Colorado. That's Jonathan Cohen. And we thank them very much for joining us. And I would like to also, before Missy maybe introduces them a little bit more in detail, thank those commissioners that submitted questions in response to Missy's request. I think we had about half the commissioners provide their questions that they wanted to be addressed by the two presenters tonight, but also just in general related to municipalization. And we hope that through the course of tonight's meeting and potentially discussion leading up to our vote, that we're able to address all of those questions. And of course, tonight you have an opportunity to pose additional questions as well. So Missy, let me turn things over to you for just a moment so you can introduce our two speakers, how they were picked, etc. And we'll get to the core of their presentations here in just a second.
Absolutely. I know it's already been a long night, so I'm going to just go really sweet and fast. We picked two communities that are in the municipalization conversation because they've successfully municipalized their power supply or have worked quite hard at doing that and had some concessions and continue to have that on the table. So we've shared all of your questions with them, and I'm really excited for their remarks tonight. And we're going to start with Manager Knight. Would you like me to control your slides, or would you like to?
Either way is fine with me.
All right. Well, why don't you go for it?
All right. So just.
You know what? If I can do this for two, pull them up.
All right. Can you see my screen? Hang on. Let's see here. Right. Now, can you see my screen?
We do.
All right.
If you go into slideshow mode, that would be great.
Yep, I'll do that. All right. So as Missy said, I'm Randy Knight. I'm the city manager for the city of Winter Park.
Randy, it's still not in slideshow mode for some reason.
Oh, it's not?
No.
I'm showing the wrong screen then. I got three screens here, and it's let me try this one more time here. I can't figure it out.
Yes, we
You
do.
got it now?
Perfect.
All right. So I've been a city manager for 14 years now. And back when we went through this process, I was the assistant city manager. I am a CPA, so they figured that financial background would help as part of that process. And if it gives me any more credibility, I am married to a Michigander, so hopefully that'll give me some credibility. A little bit of overview for Winter Park. We have a population of just over 30,000 with about 15,000 electric customers. We cover about 10 square miles with 100 megawatt peak demand. 80% of our customers are commercial or residential and 20% are commercial. And that revenue is about 50-50 between residential and commercial. And we are a distribution only utility with no generation. A quick overview of how we got here is back in 1913, the city built its own electric system, obviously in those days, mostly for streetlights, and sold it to a utility in 1927. As part of that, we retained the right to purchase the system and granted a franchise to the utility. That was a 20-year franchise. 1947, the city tried to buy it back, and that vote failed. And that as a result, they signed another 30-year franchise that had a right to purchase at the end. Did an early renewal of that franchise in 1971 for another 30 years, continued to retain that right to purchase. And so that brought us up to 2001, when that franchise was expiring. We had a commission that was ready to look at acquiring it. And I'll get into a little bit more of that detail in a few minutes, but that's when they authorized our first feasibility study. And I saw one of the questions was, did you do more than one feasibility study? We did one back in 2001. And then once we got through the arbitration process 2 years later and got the actual price, we did another one based on the actual cost of the system. So I'd be glad to answer questions about that when you're ready. But so in 2001, we started that process, and we immediately got sued by the predecessor utility, and they sued claiming that the right to purchase we had in the franchise wasn't valid. And so we fought that all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, ultimately won that battle. They also quit paying us the franchise fee we were entitled to, and we had to fight that battle and win that in court also. But ultimately, we were given the right to go to arbitration in 2002, 2003. After the arbitration, I'll get into some of those details, but we had a bond referendum in September of 2003, and it passed with 69% of the voters voting yes. And that began the transition process. We went out, got bids on bulk power contracts. We hired an outside contractor to run the system for us. And in June 1st, 2005, we flipped the switch and began serving the customers. Oh, so what motivated the city of Winter Park? I've listened to a lot of your callers, and so it's interesting, some similarities, some major differences. The biggest one was reliability was poor, and very, very poor in Winter Park. And we have a lot of trees in Winter Park, and as you probably know, trees and power lines don't play well together. And anytime they would cut trees, we would complain. And so it was a whole lot of things that led to that poor reliability, but it was bad. And the utility at the time, they gave us a take it or leave it franchise, which was a 30-year franchise. They took away the right to purchase. So in our commission's mind, it was a permanent franchise because no longer did we have a right to purchase. So it didn't matter if it was a 10-year, 20-year, or 30-year franchise. There was no right to purchase, so we felt it was permanent. And there was no performance guarantees. We wanted them to at least guarantee they would improve reliability, and they were not willing to do that as part of the agreement. And something that was very important to us was undergrounding of the power lines, and they were not willing to do that unless we paid to have our power lines undergrounded. And so the commissioners wanted to control its own destiny, so we went forward with the feasibility study. So what were the things that we saw as a benefit of buying it? You heard some of the people calling in say it: local control and accountability. We wanted to control our own the destiny of whether or not we got the power lines underground. So we saw buying the utility as a way to reinvest the profits of the utility locally. At this point, the utility that was running the system in Winter Park was based out of North Carolina. Those profits were going, rightfully so, to their shareholders all around the country. But it was, it wasn't a Florida-based, it wasn't a Winter Park-based utility. So those profits were going elsewhere. And it was a customer-first mission. Winter Park is very proud of the services we provide. And as I say, they had moved their headquarters out of state, and it just wasn't, we didn't feel there was a customer-first mission in Winter Park. And then improved reliability was a big motivator for us. We had this type of scene all over Winter Park. As I said, trees and power lines don't play well together. So they had to get these big cuts around the power lines. And we didn't like that look as we drove through our community. So we felt if we controlled the utility, we could control how it's trimmed and those type of things, and eventually get the power lines underground. Face-to-face customer service, they closed all of their outlets in Winter Park, so we had to travel elsewhere if we wanted to sit down and talk to one of their customer service representatives. And employees dedicated exclusively to the city. I can't overemphasize how important this is. When we have hurricanes that come through, and they have a lot of employees, but it does us no good if they're all over at the coast trying to restore power. And so by having our own employees that were dedicated to getting Winter Park back in service, it was an incredible improvement. At least we thought it would be. Several obstacles. I heard somebody say earlier that hadn't been done in Michigan since the early 1900s. It was similar here. It hadn't been done since the 40s. And we were facing, some significant legal challenges, as I mentioned earlier. This particular utility had 106 franchises in Florida, and they were all coming due at the same time. They had renewed all of them in that 1969 to 1972 range. They were all coming due at the same time. And there were probably about 8 or 9 Florida utilities looking at buying it. And so they were fighting very hard to keep the first one from falling. It was a very expensive undertaking. We had over $3 million in legal and consulting fees as we went through the process, which is pretty large for a community our size with no guarantee of success. The predecessor utility was highly involved in the community. They sponsored every golf tournament. They were members of Rotary, the Chamber of Commerce. They sponsored every chamber luncheon. And so they had while their reliability may have been bad, they had a lot of goodwill bought with their community involvement. They gave to a lot of charities, and they were a good corporate citizen. And so that was that they were calling in those chits at that time to say, all right, business community, come help us. They threatened to pay the franchise fee, which is about 6% of our general fund revenue at the time. So it was a big hit when they stopped paying it. And then, very interesting and unique to us, we had a split commission. 2 commissioners wanted to pursue buying it. 2 wanted to sign a new franchise. And our mayor worked for the predecessor utility. And so he was conflicted out. And so we had a 2-2 vote. We couldn't get a vote to move forward with the study. We couldn't get a vote to move forward with the franchise. And so ultimately it came down to one thing. One of the commissioners that wanted a new franchise said to the company, if you will guarantee me improved reliability, I will continue to vote for a franchise. And when they wouldn't do it, she switched over and went forward with the study and became one of the strongest supporters of municipal power after that. Some of the assertions they made during the process were that rates were going to go up, taxes were going to have to be used to subsidize the system. The city's too small to run a utility. We don't know what we're doing. We won't be able to handle storms. And I can tell you every one of those, once we did it, proved to be wrong. We were able to do it, and I'll show you some of those results. So we went to arbitration in December of 2002. It lasted till February of 2003. They finally issued the award in 2003, in May of 2003, and set the price at $42.3 million. And this is the breakdown of what that $42.3 million was made up of. So the poles and wires were only $8.2 million of that. They had $10 million in land and easements. This is the land under the substations, and then all the easements that the electric lines are in throughout the community. Books and maps was a small number. Going concern, they assigned a $12 million value to that. Separation reintegration was $1 million, and then stranded cost was 10.7. One of the questions I saw in the questions was basically, what did the feasibility say, and what was it actually? And so it was interesting because our initial feasibility study said that it was going to cost $15.8 million, not including going concern and stranded cost. And so they argued that we shouldn't have to pay going concern or stranded costs for the reason that we had a franchise clause that said we could buy it at the end of the franchise. So they should not have relied on having us as a utility after the franchise expired. So there should have been no stranded cost. We ultimately lost that in the arbitration, and they did award stranded cost. But they did say if there is going concern, it would be between 0 and 12 million. And if there is stranded cost, it would be between 0 and 21 million. And so our feasibility study wasn't completely wrong, but we were hoping for a lower number. But I will say the predecessor utility did their own feasibility study, and they said it would cost 106 million for the city to buy it. So theirs was a little overstated, as ours was a little understated. I wanted to get in a little bit the fuel mix. I knew this was important to you, but if we go back to the reasons we did it, you notice sustainability and renewable energy wasn't one of our motivators at the time. That has changed with our city commission now, and it is something we've begun to focus on in the last 3 years. But back in 2001, that wasn't really one of the top 5 motivators for our city. So we have, this is our fuel mix, 58% gas, 14% coal, 5% nuclear, 2% solar, and 20% municipal solid waste, where they burn garbage and produce electricity, and about 1% in other renewables. In the next 4 years, that's going to change. Oops, the wrong thing here. We have bought into a 20 megawatts of a large scale solar project. And so by 2025, we'll be 18% solar, but our municipal waste contract is expiring. A decision hasn't been made yet whether we're going to renew that. If not, then our natural gas reliance is going to go up a little bit. But there's a good chance we might renew that municipal solid waste contract. That's 10 megawatts. It is our most expensive energy that we buy. But it's also 24/7, 365 production of electricity, where solar, you don't get that. The municipal solid waste is a constant supply of electricity. So I mentioned we recently bought into this Florida Municipal Power Association's large-scale solar project. It's coming online, 10 megawatts coming online in 2023, and the other 10 megawatts coming on in 2024. We've also added several small-scale solar projects to our system at our sewer plant, our event center, and our public works compound. And we're going to be adding more to more city facilities. Just to highlight some of our successes, we have now undergrounded 68% of our overhead lines, and our plan, if we stay on track, we will be completely finished by 2026 and have 100% of our lines underground. Reliability has improved substantially, and we've had several hurricanes since we acquired the system. But I want to highlight that in 2004, the year before we bought the system, was a year Winter Park got hit by Hurricane Charlie, Hurricane Francis, and Hurricane Jean. And after each of those, we had people with outages as long as 14 days. And in each of those storms, the best we did in the storms was 10 days of outages, and that was under the previous utility. And our biggest frustration was trying to keep their workers in Winter Park. And they would show up, we wouldn't know where they're showing up, and then they would fix one thing and then they would be outside of the city limits. And so the hurricanes we've had since then, we've been able to team our tree people with our electric people, with our police department, and work as a team, and our fire department work as a team to make sure we methodically move through the city and get restoration done. And it's just totally focused on us. So that's been a huge success. I'm going to talk about our rates in a moment, but our rates have been competitive from the beginning, and we've got an A+ bond rating. This is our net revenues for the last 5 years. 2017 was a high year in the cost of our fuel, but since then, net income of 4.8, 5.1, 8.1, and 8.8, all of which we put towards undergrounding. And we're still that 6% franchise fee that we used to get from the predecessor utility, we continue to provide to the general fund out of our utility. So this is a rate comparison of our rates with the utility that would have been here had we renewed the franchise. The blue line is Winter Park's rates. The red line is Duke Energy's rates. And we've been consistently less than them. If you go back all the way back to 2005, there's been a couple of times where we've been slightly higher. We actually mirrored their rates for the first 5 years. We committed to the residents we would do that. And since then, they've been slightly lower than us a couple of times, but for the most part, it's looked like this. And this is compared to the other utilities in Florida. The dashed line is Winter Park. The blue line at the very top is the predecessor utility, Duke Energy. The green line is the average, the second line from the top is the average investor-owned utility in Florida. There's 4 of them. That's their average rates. The purple line is the state average of all utilities. And the red line is all the municipalities. And the orange line is OUC, which is Orlando Utility Commission, right next door to us. They're one of the best run utilities in the country. They've been a great big brother to us, and helping us see how to do things. And they've they're known as the reliable one, and they're just a very well run utility. We were slightly lower than them the last year. We're back to right at their same rate today. So in summary, have we been successful? I would say we've been very successful. We're certainly glad we did it. It was very difficult. It took a long time, as you saw in that timeline. From the time we decided to do the feasibility study in 2001, it wasn't until 2005 that we flipped the switch. We certainly had our failures. I'm happy to talk about those. In fact, I'll hit a couple of them real quick. We should have borrowed more money to start with, and a little bit more startup money. The purchase price was $43 million. We borrowed $49 million because we wanted to keep it under 50 from a psychological standpoint going into the referendum, but we could have used a few more million for separation and reintegration cost and just startup cost. we should have challenged the stranded costs because we ultimately bought the power, the initial contract we did for bulk power, we bought it from the predecessor utility, Duke Energy. So they had no stranded cost. And at that point, we didn't know that, of course, at the arbitration, but once they won the bulk power contract, we could have fought it, but our commission decided it wasn't worth the fight. And so we didn't. I think we could have won that fight. And just learning how to deal with the fuel cost and the fuel adjustments, it took us a while to get a handle on it. And so those are some of our failures, but overall, I think we're very happy we did what we did. And then is it right for Ann Arbor? Certainly that's not for me to say. So something that's definitely worth exploring, which you'll have to make that decision. I kind of ran through that fast, but I'm glad to answer any questions the commission has.
Thank you, Randy. Nancy, I have a question before we take questions from the commissioners. Did you have an agreement with both Randy and Jonathan about how we were going to take questions? Do we want to wait till the end and take questions for both of them, or do we want, for example, take questions of Randy, allow him to sign off, or Randy or Jonathan, do you have any input on that?
To your question, we sort of had presented it as in presentation and Q&A, but I think I am totally open to whatever Jonathan and Randy, as wonderful donators of their time, would like to do.
Indeed. Randy and Jonathan, do you have any preference?
I mean, I'd like to take questions now and sign off, but I'm open either way. I'm at your.
Hey, no worries. We appreciate your willingness to present, and if any other questions come up that we would like to get your input on, if we may circle back through Missy or through me, that would be wonderful.
Anytime.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we'll take questions for Randy right now, and I see Mark has his hand raised. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, very quickly. Is the reason the Orlando utilities rates are so low, in parity with yours, is because they're a newer utility and they don't have as much stranded cost, or are they just better operated than the other investor-owned utilities in the state?
They're not newer. They've been a utility forever. Winter Park ended up being the only one of those 106 franchises that actually pulled the trigger and municipalized. The other 105 signed franchises. OUC has been around for 100 years, and so they've just been a very well-run utility over the years, and that's all I can really say about it. We've always hoped we could get our rates down as low as theirs at some point.
So I guess what you're saying, if I can paraphrase that, it is possible to operate a well-run utility and to provide quality service and low costs in Florida. I assume it's the same in other states. So, thank you very much.
Yes.
Randy, can I follow up on Mark's question? I think hopefully that'll help everybody. How are you amortizing your bond in the buyout costs? Are you doing that over 10 years, 20 years, 50 years?
It was 30 years.
Also your operating costs. That was the basis of Mark's question.
Yeah, it was. So the $49 million bond issue, and then we subsequently issued another $12 million bond issue to kick off our undergrounding effort initially. But those are 30-year bonds, and so we're 16 years into paying those off now. And it's roughly, I think our debt service is somewhere around $4.5 million a year. So once those are paid off, we don't plan to ever issue debt again in our utility. So once those are paid off, that's going straight to the bottom line or reducing rates.
Great, thank you. Amber and then Missy.
Thank you. This was really interesting, and I feel like it answered a lot of the questions I had. I think you answered my question just now, but I was closing the door because my dog was barking, so I apologize because I'm going to ask you to repeat it. But I was wondering if I was interested in how you did the undergrounding, and I think that's probably a lot of the reasons reliability has improved. And so I think that's something I'm interested in, but we haven't necessarily been talking about in the context of municipalization. So I was wondering, which again, I think you just said this, but if the cost, like how much that cost, and if that was a part of the 42 million, or if that was on in addition to the 42 million. Sorry, I think you might have.
So beginning, we did do a bond issue to start our undergrounding, but since that initial undergrounding project, all of it's been done out of the profits of the system. And so initially we were spending about $3 million a year undergrounding, and we're up to about 8 million a year now that we're doing in undergrounding, and doing about actually that's we're right at 8 million a year now that we're putting towards undergrounding. So and that's just purely using the profits of the system to try to get it done as fast as we can. We did have some customers that didn't want to wait, and we did an assessment program that allowed people to jump the gun and have their neighborhood done first. And we had neighbors actually assess themselves to do that, which helped out. But we are on track to be done by December 2026.
Amber, was that it?
Yeah, thank you. That was helpful.
Missy, then Chuck, then Robert.
Yeah, apologies. My Wi-Fi is super spotty, so I keep dropping off Zoom, and I don't want to end this. So apologies, commissioners. I had two questions, just kind of clarifying on Ember's. If I heard right, it was the initial bond issue wasn't for the undergrounding, and then you bonded an additional 12 million to start the undergrounding, and then everything there else has been through profit.
That's correct.
Awesome. Okay, so my question then, and I think you said this too, was you don't do generation, right? You procure on the market.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And let me expound on that a little bit. We did an initial bid when we bought the system, and Duke Energy won it, and they were our sole provider. And then the next time we went out to bid, Florida Power and Light won the bid, and they were our sole provider. This time we've got more than one provider. We've got OUC is providing some of our power, and the Florida Municipal the Florida Municipal Power Association is the biggest provider, and that solar we just bought was through a conglomeration that they put together, and so the market in Florida is pretty robust, in trying to secure power. So we've been very lucky to get better deals each time.
Thanks, Chuck.
Hey, Randy, Chuck Hookham. I'm an old electrical. I used to do a lot of work for Seminole Electric. One of my questions, why did you choose to municipalize? Could you also have joined Florida Cooperative and gone that route?
So we looked at several models. There wasn't really a cooperative close to us that made sense. We did look at acquiring it and just letting OUC or neighboring utility operate it. They actually put in a bid to operate it. It wasn't the best bid. So the feasibility study said we could make a profit doing it. And so rather than turn those profits over to somebody else, the one thing OUC wouldn't do for us is guarantee the undergrounding. So that's kind of why we decided to keep it in-house and control it ourselves.
Yep, made sense. You guys also, are you a gas utility as well?
No. Okay. No, there's still a franchise with Tico Gas, People's Gas in Florida.
Okay. Did you think about municipalizing that as well?
Very, very briefly. We didn't get as far as doing a study about it. And quite frankly, there's not a lot of gas usage here. Their utility doesn't even cover the entire city. And most people just use it for their stoves. It's, it's really very limited.
Yep. Last question for you. What voltage do you connect that electrically, and to who do you have as a wheeling in power supply?
I can't answer the voltage question. I'm an accountant, not an electrical engineer. I can get that answer. I can get that answer to you. But the wheeling comes in primarily over Duke Energy lines because they surround us.
Right.
We do take at the distribution level some power from OUC because we're adjacent to each other, but those are distribution level connections. But all of our is wheeled through Duke Energy lines.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Knight, for this presentation. It's been very informative. I had a couple of questions, some of which you may have said in your presentation, but I may have missed. Can you remind me what is the city's operating budget, the yearly operating budget?
So the citywide operating budget is 150 million. The electric utility is about 48 million.
Okay. And the debt service amount, what was that total amount again per year?
Per year is about 4.5 million.
All right. And so the yearly profits that you mentioned that range from roughly, well, I believe it's $1 or $1.7 million to $4 million over the last 4 or 5 years. Does that profit include the debt servicement, or is that?
Yeah, that's after paying debt service.
So removing the debt servicement, once the debt service has been paid off, that profit would turn into a closer amount of, closer to possibly even 10 million?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Robert. Edie, go ahead.
Thank you, Randy, for your time tonight. My question pertains to the right to purchase that Winter Park had in their agreement. Would you describe that as having been kind of a necessary condition for municipalization in your case?
It certainly made it easier. The only other way we think we could have done it here would be to use eminent domain to acquire the utility. And we would have had to then, of course, prove a greater public purpose of the city owning it versus a private utility owning it. So that would have been a bigger hurdle to jump. And I don't know about everywhere, but in Florida, to do eminent domain, you have to pay not only your attorneys, but their attorneys. And so that would have just probably made the hurdle too big for us to jump over.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, just to follow up on that question, I was wondering if Dr. Stoltz might be able to compare the conditions here locally versus in Winter Park for that question.
Yeah, as for those who joined us for the Attorney Brader presentation, the Foot Act makes it clear that we can have a competing utility, which has not been economical historically because of needing to own distribution lines, which are quite expensive to take on without a guarantee of 100% of your users. Or we have to do eminent domain. So everyone that is exploring municipalization in the state is thinking about eminent domain, sure, would be the pathway. At least that's my understanding of what our colleagues that have called in and A2P2 are interested in.
Calling for any other questions? If not right yet, I have two. First of all, sort of starting at the end and then moving forward in our timeline to the feasibility study, I just want to make sure I understand. Not only are you not generating, but it sounds to me like you're contracting for the operation of your utility. You don't have employees in your public works department, for example, that are on city staff that are running your utility. Is that correct?
Well, that we started out contracting it out, and we actually signed a 12-year contract with a company called Inco Utility Services. And as it got closer to the end of the 12 years, we had out clauses that we could buy it out. We bought it out after year 11, and since 2016, we've been doing it in-house.
Okay, good. I appreciate that clarification. I had misunderstood. I'm hoping that you can provide us guidance on a feasibility study. So right now, our main question is, do we recommend to city council to spend a chunk of change to do a feasibility study? I'm wondering what you would recommend so that we get the most out of a feasibility study. How do we structure the RFP? Did you do your 2 feasibility studies with the same company, 2 different companies? How'd you pick them? Were you satisfied with their work? If we indeed go that route, how do we get the very most that we can out of such a study?
So there's a lot to unpack there. We did not use the same company both times. And it's a very interesting story, but it's a long story. But we used Black & Veatch the first time, and to make a long story short, they were threatened that if they worked with us again, they would never do business for Duke Energy ever again. And so they, obviously chose to never. They now only work for the predecessor utilities. The second time we used a small company. Well, we've used First Southwest Municipal Bond Company. They had a wing of their company that did consulting for electric utilities, and then we hired the 2 guys that did that broke off on their own, and so it's WHH is their name. A guy by the name of Jerry Warren and Bill Harrington, and they did the second study. And they do these studies around the country now, and they are fantastic. But Black & Veatch was fantastic too. But Jerry and Bill are great. They're just, it's just a 2-person team, but they know their stuff. I actually hired Jerry to run my utility. He became an employee of the city of Winter Park until he retired, and now he's back doing his feasibility stuff again. But he knows his stuff. He knows. And he certainly knows bulk power supply, all of that type of thing. So to me, the critical part is somebody that's not just, you're going to get the answer that municipalization is the right thing. You really want the answer. And I think in your RFP, you want to make it clear. In your conversations, you want to make it clear. We want you to tell us the truth. Does this make sense financially or not? And not somebody that's in the bag for the investor owns or in the bag for munis. And so that's probably the biggest challenge, is to have somebody that will tell you the truth. And I can tell you, Jerry will tell you the truth, because he's done some of them where he said, no, it probably doesn't make sense in this situation. And so I think that's important to know.
I'm curious. I'm saying this a little bit in jest, but did they say, well, to get most of the truth, it's going to cost you $50,000 to get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, it's going to cost you double that? Or how did they structure their quotes, and how did you know how much, whether the quote was realistic and how much you should spend on a feasibility study?
And I honestly don't know how to answer that question, because it hadn't been done when we did it. And so knowing what the right rate was, I had nothing to compare it to. The Black & Veatch study, I think, was only like $90,000, which sounds, I don't know if that sounds like a lot or a little, but it sounded like a lot to me at the time. But now looking back, it seems like it wasn't very much. That was an interesting story, because they were on the approved. One of the problems you have is getting the incumbent utility to cooperate with any real information. And so, and if you don't, otherwise, the person doing the study is having to make a whole lot of assumptions about, what the average load is, what, all that stuff about the customer base, what's the mix, how many residential, commercial, they got to make all those assumptions. And so we actually got an agreement with the predecessor utility that they would cooperate if we use somebody off their engineering list. And Black & Veatch was on their list, but I didn't use the Orlando Black & Veatch. I got a guy out of Kansas City, Missouri with Black & Veatch to do the study. made them mad, but they cooperated. And so they opened their books so we could see the stuff they needed to actually do a real study.
Yeah.
And so it's a bigger challenge when they're not cooperating and they're having to make a lot of assumptions. So I think that will cost you a lot more if they're just having to make a bunch of assumptions.
$90,000 in, what was it, 2001 was the first study?
Yeah.
Today's dollars, that's a lot more, and Ann Arbor is obviously a larger community, so we might
Right.
extrapolate from there, at least as a guidepost for getting a sense of what a reasonable figure is going to be for our feasibility study.
Right.
So maybe I'll open it up to other commissioners keying off of my question and thinking about a feasibility study. And I'm also looking at some people probably on the commission that know more about this kind of stuff than I do. What other kinds of questions should we be asking Randy so that we get the most that we possibly can out of a feasibility study if indeed we decide to go that way? No additional questions, it looks like. Well, Randy, I will say on behalf of all of us, we really appreciate your public service, not only to the residents of Winter Park, but for us here in Ann Arbor. We really appreciate the time in putting together the presentation, looking at all the questions, and being with us tonight. That was a substantial investment, and it really means a lot to us. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
I think that's that's not a skylight behind him. That's just that's a real light. So he's
yes, it is.
Okay.
Randy, you can't leave. You can't leave.
Okay, Missy, or Jonathan, I'll turn it over maybe directly to you, and you can introduce yourself and launch into your presentation.
Sure, Missy, is that okay?
Jonathan, kick it.
All right, I'll do it. I'll do it. Oh my goodness. Well, what a pleasure to be with you all tonight. My name is Jonathan Cohen. I'm the director of the Climate Initiatives Department for the City of Boulder. It has been a fascinating conversation so far. Just in terms of making sure that I'm moving quickly through this conversation, the reason that I'm here talking to you tonight is that I don't say this with any sort of pride, it's just the reality that I am the staff person in the City of Boulder that worked on municipalization the very longest. And I'll give you a little bit of a timeline around that. So I want to thank Randy. He and I know each other as we were going through our early process. We reached out to the best and brightest minds that either had succeeded or had lessons to learn around municipalization, Randy being one. He mentioned ENCO, another group that we worked with. One of your callers earlier mentioned Jefferson County. We talked with those folks. And so I think doing what you're doing is incredibly important, hearing the stories. So I really want to thank all of you commissioners for taking up this really important issue. And I want to thank all of your callers and everybody that's watching this meeting. This is a really important issue that you are addressing, no doubt about it. I was really struck with the comments by many of your callers. They sound incredibly familiar from going through this process for over a decade. I also want to thank my colleagues, Paul Cullen and Steve Whitaker, who both called in. They are two of our incredibly bright and very, very passionate members of our community who served on working groups over the duration of our municipalization effort. Okay, so the hardest part, I think, for me tonight is to be succinct. So after a decade of this project and literally hundreds of presentations on municipalization, town halls, council conversations, we have a lot of material. So it was difficult for me to kind of condense this down into telling a story for you tonight. And that's what I'm going to do. I want to tell you a story. And it is a story of Boulder's exploration to create our own locally owned and operated electric utility. I'm going to jump to the spoiler because you heard it earlier that in July of last year and last November, the City of Boulder did reach a settlement with Xcel Energy that includes a franchise agreement along with a partnership agreement. And that facilitates our ability to participate in electrical system planning, collaboration on projects, and really a commitment to work together to achieve our city's goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2030 and some scalability. So the impact that Xcel is having here in the state of Colorado. As I said, the community voted to enter into the franchise on November 3rd. I'm going to get back to the points and the guts of that agreement, but I want to come back to a point here. Make no mistake, I am not telling a cautionary tale. As Paul Cullen mentioned, that we did make mistakes, and you can learn from those mistakes, no doubt about it. I get asked this question a lot. Was it worth it? Would you do it all over again? And my answer every single time is emphatically yes. And we as a community established a series of community-based energy goals. We never went into this process with the intention really to own and operate a local utility. Our goal was not to own wires and poles and to be the utility. It was about achieving our goals as a community. And that's a theme I want to keep coming back to because it's a really important one. I will share, it'll become obvious that I am a firm believer in public power. All right, I want to start, if possible, and I'm going to tempt my technological fate here. I want to try to show a video. And the video is a little outdated, but I think it's an important one. We have a number of materials out there that kind of tell this story, but this is one that really emphasizes the importance of value. And I think it really emphasizes the importance of the fight that comes with municipalization. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do my best. And if for some reason this doesn't work, it's okay. I have a PowerPoint that we'll go right to. So bear with me for just a second, the awkward pause. I'm going to share my sound and I am going to just ask, let's see who I can see on my screen. Chairman, do you see a YouTube?
I do see the whole YouTube screen, yep. And if you go full screen, then we should be in good shape.
Great.
Fires are blowing up all over Colorado, growing to about 8,000 acres in a matter of hours, as many as 60 structures.
To the National Climatic Data Center last year, the warmest on record for the United States, going back 118 years.
Weather disasters carried more than $1 billion price tag, including...
This is a story about something that's happening in every community across America, and what one community is doing to fight back. This is a story about democracy, about David versus Goliath, about our planet and health versus corporate greed. This is a story that might just be the shot across the bow for how our society finally addresses climate change. It all started with a local community that created a landmark opportunity to create a new energy model to be applied in cities across the country. It's a model that addresses the root cause of climate change, and it's happening here in Colorado.
2011, the City of Boulder voted to localize its power supply. First city in the country to do so for the sole purpose of reducing its impact on the planet.
We voted to become a locally owned municipal utility so that we could make our energy decisions right here at home.
Our electricity is predominantly produced in coal-fired plants.
Our community has one of the most carbon-intensive fuel supplies in the country. We already know where scientists say we need to be to even begin making a difference, but we also know that we are not on a path to get there anytime soon. After many frustrating years of trying to reach our energy reduction goals, by working with our existing monopoly utility, Xcel Energy, we learned just how broken our country's energy infrastructure is, all because of just a handful of huge corporations that stand in the way of change. So we decided to create a model for how a community, any community, can take real action against climate change by phasing out fossil fuels and transitioning to a grid dominated by renewable energy. Xcel spent $1 million on a well-orchestrated fear campaign, but a committed group of community advocates and a small nonprofit that gets youth engaged in politics won the day. Outspent 10-1, the Grassroots Coalition registered voters, knocked on doors, and made thousands of phone calls. So David beat Goliath, for now.
And then a third-party reviewer has come in and looked at that complete package and said Boulder has done an excellent job at studying this, better than most communities that these third-party reviewers work with.
And they found out that they could get there. Cleaner, cheaper, and quicker on their own. So with this news, Goliath reemerged. And this time, Xcel Energy is flooding our community with even more money.
Boulder once again is facing a massive amount of corporate influence on our community.
They're funding a ballot measure that aims to undo our community's work, confusing residents and businesses with outright lies. And they're preparing to spend whatever it takes. This is a textbook example of how corporations attempt to influence our democracy, election after election. No, seriously, they have a textbook. There's a lot on the line here for Xcel. Not only are they defending the $35 million in profit they make off of Boulder each and every year, but they know that Boulder is on the verge of setting an important precedent. A precedent that has national significance and could threaten not just Xcel Energy, but the very core of the business model and the billions in profits that come with it of the dirty coal energy industry. If Boulder is successful, we'll show the country that with local control, a community can put their values into action. That when a community isn't reliant on an outdated corporate structure for their energy, they can not only power their community off renewable energy, but it can be done better and cheaper. And if we can do it, maybe other communities will start wondering what the millions in profits they pay to their power provider could do in their city. And in fact, communities are already starting to do just that. And that would be a symbolic defeat Xcel just can't have. If we win, we trigger a national model that can be replicated across the country. But the only way David beats Goliath this time is with your help. Because the only way to counter money is with people. We need to run a truly sophisticated grassroots campaign that will expose Xcel for what they are, a huge corporation looking to buy an election in order to protect their profits. We need to hire organizers that can recruit volunteers to mobilize our community, both online and off. We need the resources to get the real message out. We did it last time, but this time is going to be a fight our community has never seen. They might have the war chest, but we have the army, and we are here to recruit you. Right now, more than ever, we need you. Your financial support will help restore our community's voice.
I'm actually going to stop it there, and I'm going to shift my share. And that was a little abrupt. I apologize for that. I want to shift now, and the reason that I showed that video, and Chairman, could you also now tell me if there is a PowerPoint slide?
It is, but
Thank
not
you.
full screen yet. Yep.
Got it. I will do that. I cannot believe I got that right. It's a miracle.
After all those
Okay.
hundreds, you're getting good.
Okay, well, the reason that I wanted to share that video with all of you is that was a series of campaigns that, I'm so sorry, just get rid of that. A series of campaigns that led up to a number of votes that we have. So we won that vote. We won the second vote, and we won subsequent votes here in the city of Boulder. Now, the story has changed in terms of our relationship to our utility provider, but that macro view of our energy economy has not. And I want that to be the backstop for your conversation and your community to understand what it is you're really up against. Randy said it well. Municipalization is hard. It is expensive, but in the end, it provides great value. And it's whether or not that value is right for your community, I think, is what's most important. So I want to just go through some slides with you that will hopefully answer some of your questions that I saw proposed, and we'll just kind of crank through these as quickly as I can. So we started out our municipalization effort. Look at, I am messing it up all over now. Really thinking about how we identify local power. And that is, of course, you've heard a lot about municipalization, but it's our effort to bring clean, local, affordable, and reliable electricity to our communities. So when we talk about our energy goals, they are really underpinned by opportunities to create a robust energy economy, more control of our energy supply and investments, and services that meet our community's needs, how we provide value and access for everyone. There were a lot of discussions in your callers' comments about equity. How do we provide innovation opportunities for technology at competitive costs that balance short and long-term needs? How do we create a reliable, secure, and resilient energy system? A safe energy supply that's protected against external threats. So as we began our effort really in earnest back in 2007, that was our first opportunity to negotiate with our incumbent utility around our franchise. And after several years of negotiating, that's where I became involved. It was pretty clear that our utility was not really thinking about a new agreement or partnership agreement. It was really to contain or continue with a relationship that's a buyer-seller relationship. And so for us, we wanted to be treated as customers and as equals in thinking about our energy future. So the local power project really began in earnest in 2010, and that was to examine options that could provide Boulder residents and businesses with electricity that's increasingly clean, reliable, and competitively priced. We learned a lot across this journey. The project was largely focused on municipalization as that pathway for achieving the goals. And of course, it involved a lot of litigation matters between the city and Xcel. So think about the choices that we had at the time. Really, of course, it was to stay with Xcel under what was called our status quo option, which is to continue with no franchise. In 2010, our council, after our urging as a staff team, agreed to allow our franchise to expire, allowing that franchise fee to expire. And I'll come back to that in terms of the essential funding necessary for this project. So again, Xcel is obligated to continue to provide the level of service that they were, and we could function indefinitely without a franchise. We could continue to focus on things like demand side management, options as they become available, and things that are really in the margins. And that's really was not compatible with our community's desires to really be innovative. We also could look at ways to create a new franchise agreement with Xcel. And over the decade, we had multiple fits and starts of working groups with Xcel, new opportunities to partner, writing white papers about what we were seeking. Or as we presented to our council, we could actually create a municipal utility that owns or operates the distribution system. So I won't go through this, you know all this. One thing that I would flag is that it's a very interesting phenomena when in Colorado we have 29 munis already. So the question then became of what would be different if our peer communities around the state can own and operate a utility, why couldn't we? We generally feel like we're fairly smart people. The difference, of course, is that being able to shift from being served by an investor-owned to a muni and the cost and the legal challenges that brings. And so of those 29, all were set up originally in that form. So municipalization became a really big challenge, and it represented change. And so that really was the piece that our utility grabbed a hold of, delay and change, and the risk that might come with that. So as we went through some of our initial conversations as a community, we really started to lay out some charter requirements that followed this pattern, how we think about the 3Ds, decarbonize, decentralize, and democratize our energy, and really pin our work around rates, reliability, and renewables. So this is a little bit of a blurry slide, but just gives you a sense of some of the timeline. I won't go through this. This is all publicly available. But I do want to highlight some really important things that we've had a number of votes. First in 2011, again in 2015, 2017, and then again in 2019. One of the big issues that I already flagged is the loss of revenues from our franchise fee. So one of the first votes that we actually did is create a fairly elegant solution to replace those funds by creating what was called the utility occupation tax. Our ability to tax our utility provider to do business in the city. And it was an algorithm basically to collect the same amount of money from their customers as they were under a franchise fee. Those funds were then remitted to the city. And that's what we used to fund our legal, technical, and financial work to make sure that we were doing our feasibility analysis adequately. So I won't go through this just for sake of time, but just shows some of the votes and some of the margins on those votes. But you can see this has been a grassroots-led effort from the beginning. That video was one of dozens of videos that were put out by many of our incredibly bright and dedicated community members. So they are the ones that, in fact, drive these campaigns. And so this was never about the city or local government. Our job and role was to make sure that we were making smart choices and that we had all the information presented to our elected officials in our community that they could have informed votes. And so campaigns on both sides of the issue, for and against municipalization, have really ensued over the entire decade or process of the project. So I won't read through this, but there are some key pieces that I wanted to flag, and I think you probably know these. These are the 5 chunks of work that we identified in our, essentially our roadmap. So first, and this is really hard for you to read, I realize that, understanding the regulatory context. Paul mentioned earlier in his call about things that we got wrong. And I think one of those is really understanding the role of the regulators. While the city has the constitutional right in Colorado to actually acquire the system, there's no clear pathway. Just as you heard from Randy, there is no roadmap on how this actually plays out. What is the role of the Public Utilities Commission? In the state of Colorado, Xcel Energy serves the predominant number of customers. And so we have a Public Utilities Commission that essentially oversees one regulated monopoly. And so understanding where and when they fit in was really critical. And the sequence of when you go to your regulators, when you go to FERC, when you might go to your district court for condemnation. And we sequenced those things incorrectly. We thought that we could go to district court first. The PUC came back and said, no, you need to come to us first. And so the impact of that is delay. It's time. And in this case, time was absolutely money. We have a finite amount of funds to get this project done, and any delay just really burnt our capital. So understanding the regulatory context is really, really important. The second piece is planning. So when we think about what we need to do in terms of a transition plan, that was really important. We developed roughly a 600-item work plan. And we know the things that need to get done aren't rocket science, but you need to know how to do them. So this kind of pushes back to this idea that cities don't know how to run a utility because you've never done it. Well, we run a water, stormwater, and wastewater utility with over $1 billion of assets. We know how to run utilities, and we would hire the right people to run an electric utility. So, but that was one of the criticisms, that we had never done it, which is completely fair. So that work plan was to really lay out, how do we get from here to the point that we can stand up a utility? Third is the acquisition. One of your callers earlier referenced the idea that acquisition doesn't have to take a lot of time. I wish that was the case, but that was only in the instance that you have a willing seller. And in our case, Xcel Energy is not interested, nor were they interested in selling the distribution system to the city. So that meant that we had to file regulatory actions to move towards acquiring the system using our condemnation power. And so that's where there was this asymmetry between the regulators and the district court in terms of when and how we actually do the inventory of the assets, value those assets, and go to the district court for condemnation. Fourth is more of the technical. How do we separate? How do we do the construction of the facilities in order to take what was once one distribution system and now create 2 distribution systems? What does that look like, and how do you do it? So hiring electrical engineers, knowing that the utility, the incumbent utility, is going to push back on any costs associated with new metering or new infrastructure, how you deal with the substations, all really critical parts of the technical part of your analysis. And then fifth, I put this on there. This is a really important one. We had to, throughout this entire thread, make sure that we remained really focused on the end goal, which is creating the utility of the future. Our fear was we could get through this and just replicate what we have today. So in terms of the ability to really implement the utility future and say, here's how the city-run utility will look different than it does today. That, I think, is really the sweet spot. So what does it look like to create a marketplace for energy services? How do we create a space where we allow innovation to occur? How do we continue to kind of marry this idea that a utility has to deliver a service, a safe and reliable service, with this new innovation and issues related to climate? So that was really, I think, an important piece. And I would just say, Missy, if I need to wrap up, please tell me, just jump in, because I could do this all night. Okay.
You're doing great.
All right, thank you. All right, so I wanted to get into quickly, that's why I rushed through that. I know a lot of your interest is around feasibility. So I would just say feasibility is not a one-time thing. Feasibility needs to take place throughout your process of creating and standing up a local electric utility because things change. You learn new things as you go. So originally we had done a very, very preliminary feasibility analysis in 2005, just looking at, is this something that is even possible? What would it look like? And that was an R.W. Beck study also. We spent about $50,000 on that. We had an energy committee that really scoped that out. And that helped us get our footing underneath us moving into that franchise negotiation. So in 2011, we really moved into feasibility in a really big way. So what you're looking at is a screenshot from a Prezi that tried, this was a public presentation and it was on our website so people could explore the parts and pieces of our feasibility analysis. And I want to give you the guts of this thing, first of all. So it started with a load model, really understanding what our existing and future load is. That's really important as you start to think about the resources necessary to meet that load requirement. So this is again hard to see. I apologize. I'll send you a copy of this slide so you can see this. Then we used a resource model to really optimize resources. This is a piece of software called Homer. It's actually was developed here in Boulder. It was developed for NREL to really optimize your system towards the type of output or resources that you want to prioritize. So we have options that look at low cost with some amount of renewables, no coal, local generation. It includes all of the cost of those resources. So you input the load model into the resources, then you have your outputs optimized for, the type of scenario that you'd be seeking. That all gets put into a financial model and allows us to put in additional costs. So things like your stranded acquisition costs, your capital costs, your program and innovation costs, operation and maintenance, transmission costs, your open access transmission tariff for those resources utilizing the system. All of that then created outputs that we ran through a secondary piece of software and this is all staff. I should say this up front. This is staff supported by roughly 14 community-based working groups with an incredible amount of expertise. The decision analysis was really an interactive opportunity to look at uncertainty. This is really important. Some people use Monte Carlo analyses. This was our opportunity to really understand where are the high impact variables. Is it your bond rating, for example, your interest rates? What about stranded costs? What are some ranges that we might consider and how might we mitigate those? So that decision analysis was really important to come up with some results that really allowed us to look at rates, our finances, our reliability indices, our climate impact and renewables, and give our community a sense of what feasibility looks like. So one important piece here too, I want to just stress, feasibility is not just looking at whether or not you can do it from a technical, legal, and financial standpoint, but it should answer the question, should you? Not just can you, but should you? Does it provide adequate value beyond where you are today? And that was something that we started with in terms of working at our community-based goals. How do we get there? What does it look like? And how does our utility support those overall goals? So that can we versus should we is something that was really important to us as we went through. I just talked about the decision analysis. This is a little bit of a zoom in on that screen. You can see some of the diagrams that we had out to our community and what the results actually meant. And then this is a screenshot again of some of the results. This is the early modeling. Okay, couple things here, and then I want to get to some of your comments. First, as we started thinking about, I guess maybe these are some of the conclusions. Early on, we really developed a clear set of metrics, and those metrics were embedded within our city charter. So that meant that to guide the creation of electric utility, we had to meet the metrics related to rates, operation, renewables, carbon, cost, and reliability. That was really important. So we set that foundation to say, if we can't meet these metrics, then we should not go forward with creating an electric utility. That was an important piece of our work early on. Second, the financial modeling. So I talked about the early modeling. This is an area that you need to really keep moving throughout the duration of your project to make sure that as things are updated, costs are continually input into this model and the financial feasibility is updated on a regular basis. So one of the things that we did do, and this is available online, I'd be happy to share all of this with you, is we created a financial forecast tool. And you see a screenshot on the right. This is the cover of that tool. It's roughly a 100-page document. This is a user's guide. And what we did is allow our community members to go into this spreadsheet and change those toggles. If someone said, oh, you'll never get that interest rate in terms of your taxable bonds, well, go into the model and move those sliders where you think it fits. And it allows our community to understand financial feasibility and what that might look like. And if they didn't believe that what we were putting in there in terms of bounds was accurate, that they could question that. But it was a great process to really kind of create that financial forecast tool. I think Steve Whitaker, one of the callers, mentioned that our community members continue to utilize this forecast tool moving forward into this last vote that we had. So that financial forecasting is really important. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we really did start to function as a utility early on. And that was because of the recognition that power supply was over 50% of our annual debt service. So yes, we knew that purchasing fully depreciated poles and wires maybe wasn't the best use of funds. We thought about it as really buying our freedom, but really what are the most impactful variables? Power supply was by far the biggest one. So we went out to bid. We actually put out an RFP twice. And we treated it as if we were a utility today, what kind of full requirements offerings could you provide to the city of Boulder? And I will tell you, it was extraordinary to see the kind of bids that we were getting. This answers the question or the criticism that we're not big enough to get the kind of buying power that Xcel, who operates in 7 states, might get. Well, we were able to put that to rest and recognize that our ability to achieve those kind of prices was there. We had bidders willing and ready to do full requirements or partial requirements offerings, really innovative portfolios, including battery storage, and then some non-power supply options that would look at operating the utility and thinking about some of our other opportunities around ecosystems management in terms of climate. So I won't go into this, but all of this material is available on our website, all of the responses and a summary of those responses. I think it's really important to do this kind of work too. All right, and so this was some of the results of that power supply scenario. We looked at scenarios around 100% Xcel Energy, looking at 3 years of Xcel, then high renewables, day one high renewables, and you can see that cost average of those responses. Now, I want to hover here for just a second, and I know I'm going a little bit long. One of the reasons that we actually mapped out 100% renewable, or excuse me, Xcel Energy portfolio, first of all, that's our baseline. The 3-year Xcel, then high renewables, was a scenario that we came up with to mitigate stranded cost. And we can talk about that if you'd like to more, but one of the elegant solutions that we worked with our regulators on is to think about the fact that in terms of the utility being able to claim stranded cost, they have to prove that they cannot sell that excess generation that would be released or stranded by Xcel leaving the system. They have to prove that they can't sell that capacity to native load customers. And so we follow very closely and participate in Xcel's electric resource plans. And when they come out with their load forecast, we came out with a scenario that said we can gradually depart. We can use that scenario to mitigate stranded cost. As Xcel needs new capacity, we release capacity. We're only 4% of their sales in Colorado, so it's not a huge amount. So we created this gradual departure plan to essentially say we may not be able to get to 100% renewables on day one, but we could balance, maybe pay some stranded cost or wean ourselves off over, say, a 5-year period. And so that was one of the mitigating strategies that we started to explore, and we wanted to understand what the impact would be in terms of cost if we chose that power supply option. So in summary, the last tool update demonstrated that we absolutely could operate a local electric utility. And in terms of promising financial feasibility, we would see positive cash flow on day one, even with that debt service to pay off that annual debt. And of course, it's not surprising that the most expensive of our scenarios would occur if we bought 100% of our power from Xcel over 10 years. Okay, so a couple of things that are cautionary. Again, I mentioned this earlier. How we navigated the legal and regulatory ground was, again, there was no roadmap. This was a really, really challenging part of our work because, again, the incumbent utility, they can wield their power to throw lawsuits and roadblocks. While those lawsuits eventually were overturned and we won, again, more delay. And that meant that we had to go back to our voters to get more money to continue the feasibility analysis and to continue the work that was necessary to finish the project. Really important, won't go into this in detail, but we had a very, very strong communications and engagement strategy. This was about making sure that our community understood the questions that were being asked and answered, making sure that they had access to the data and understand that they needed to be engaged in asking these critical questions, because at the end of the day, we needed to make sure this was right for our community. I talked about the transition planning and really understanding what it looked like to do the actual technical work to stand up. That included the engineering plans and the schematics to actually separate the system. I mentioned earlier about the work plan. Again, don't look at this. This will make your eyes hurt. Just a screenshot of one of our portion of our work plan. Mentioned again the separation of the systems. Here is our distribution system. We are not very different from Ann Arbor. We're about 27 square miles, about 107,000 in population, a university, some large anchor energy users like the federal labs. So somewhat similar in terms of an overall snapshot of the communities. And then on the right is what it looked like after we did our separation. We have lots of detailed engineering all the way down to every single feeder that would show how we would actually do the separation. And then I mentioned this also, just making sure that we were demonstrating innovation and commitment to clean energy and that utility of the future. All right, we can come back to this, but I wanted to get to this partnership piece. And again, I'll try to go fast. So, fast forward, all sounds great, and enter the world of COVID. Now, why I raise this specter is that everything really had to come to a little bit of a delay in terms of the work that was going on. So as I mentioned, delay has not been our friend in this project. The comments about mistakes really are about creating more delay in the process. So knowing that we were in a position of having to go back to our voters to ask for additional funds to get us across the finish line, another couple of years of funding, Xcel came to the city and suggested a renewed round of negotiations. I will say at this point, Xcel has become a different company. Our effort to continually highlight the importance of this buyer-seller relationship and the importance of energy and achieving community goals has really driven Xcel to become a different company, especially here in Colorado. So when I say it's been worth it, it has been worth it even if we have not created our utility yet. If we ever do, great, but at the same time, we have moved the utility in a pretty significant way, and that's significant. So in terms of our contribution to global climate change. So the partnership agreement really provides that framework for a new way to work together. I want to highlight a really important piece of this. So it identifies specific options that address the gap between Xcel's 80% emissions reduction by 2030. That's where our utility believes they will be, and Boulder's goal of getting to 100% renewable electricity. So again, a lot to read here, but I want to just say that as we negotiated this agreement, there were a lot of parts and pieces that did set us up to be successful and essentially do some of the things that we wanted to do through municipalization, but also set us up in the event that we had to go back to municipalization. So a few of the things that we got into this agreement is an assurance of GHG reductions by 2030, and having Xcel, and this is GHG reductions statewide, not just for the city of Boulder, this is for the state of Colorado. Having these emission check-ins in 2022, 24, and 27, and allowing the city to exit the franchise if they're not hitting those GHG targets. The partnership agreement really facilitates some modernization in our grid planning, facilitates renewable electricity goals, maintains our feasibility on municipalization in the future, allows us to catch up on the undergrounding funds that we didn't have access to during the duration of our municipalization effort, which is roughly $33 million. I will just kind of turn to this because I know this is important to you all and your listeners. So again, what we really wanted to do is see hard and fast emission reductions. Xcel has said where they believe they will be in 2030. We wanted them to hold themselves accountable for actual CO2 equivalent reductions between now and then. So these are the emission reductions that they agreed to. Again, these are now codified at the state level. They know that they need to hit them, and we wielded our power of municipalization to get them to do that. So it allows us to end the franchise through those GHG reductions in 2025, 2028, but we also have the ability to vote to end the franchise in 2026, 31, and 36 for any reason. So if Xcel is not playing nice, if they are not the partner that we believe they should be, we can go right back to municipalization. Now, here was the important piece, is that in that agreement, it also puts a $200 million cap on any condemnation award. That includes acquisition cost, real property interest, going concern, damages to the remainder, and the purchase of 2 existing substations. This is fundamental, because there was this threat that Xcel would be able to get all of these additional costs levied against us, and we would break our budget, essentially. Our modeling shows that we know we can be cash positive at 214 million, and even more than that, depending on some of the other variables. So this puts a cap on those costs going forward. It also creates an agreement on issues that we were tangled up in around some substation work and any updates to the existing substation interconnection studies and design drawings. So that's big. And it allows us to move forward and not relitigate the discussion back in front of our Public Utilities Commission. So in essence, it actually puts us in a really good place, even further along than we are today, or would have been in some sense, because it gives us uncertainty if we go back to municipalization. So I mention this because it is not off the table. Municipalization is not a done deal in Boulder. We are going to take the opportunity over the next couple of years to work with our utility to see if we can push them even further to have a bigger impact at the state level and possibly in the other states that they serve. All right, that was a lot. I am sorry for that. As I mentioned, I've been doing this a long time. I can talk about this a long time, but I want to turn to your questions now, and I see some raised hands already.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Mark.
So in hindsight, basically you use municipalization to get leverage over the utility and to get them to do what you wanted, which is in their interest and everybody's interest, but certainly doesn't resonate well with some of their stockholders. But put that aside. My question is this: could you have gotten the utility to the same place with something other than municipalization?
If I hear your question right, the you in that equation is maybe Boulder, or is that no? Boulder. The answer is no. And I say that because we have a long history of working. We are a city that engages very actively at the state legislature. We introduce bills, we get sponsorship in bills, we push the utility through the regulatory and the legislative approach. I don't believe, of course, the utility reacts to markets, they react to the law, but at the same time, I don't believe that they would be where they are today. I say that with a fair amount of certainty.
See.
First and foremost, thank you. This was awesome. Second, not surprising, Boulder, as you mentioned, and Ann Arbor are very, very similar and share very, very complementary goals and objectives in this landscape. I'm wondering, as you kind of think about the way technology has changed since you started, have you explored limited poles and wires options where you really center generation and don't try to fight over owning the distribution network?
Absolutely. Yeah. Misty, great question. And I will say that we explored, didn't have time to go into it in my presentation, but we explored all types of options. We looked at community choice energy as kind of muni light. We looked at a non-poles and wires opportunity. We looked at an overbuild, basically replicating the existing distribution system and what the cost might be there. We looked at running transmission on the 230 kV line up to a WAPA line and perhaps trying to connect in that way. And this is part of the antiquated reality in Colorado, and many states face this, right? I mean, it is a regulated monopoly state. We cannot do the things that we want to do because of the regulatory construct. So instead, we started to look at, okay, could we actually do our own generation? Could we think about new opportunities? And at the end of the day, to ensure that we were able to transition to the utility of the future, we realized that we had to own and operate that distribution system. Now, one other key point here is that while we do have a lot of funds for underground, we are exploring, thinking about what reliability in a resilient energy system really looks like. Doesn't mean that you just underground power lines. You can look at pairing storage opportunities. You can look at critical facilities and other ways to meet those energy needs. The expense of putting wires underground is pretty extensive. So we're trying to really use those funds where it makes the most sense. So I use that to say technology exists in a lot of different ways as we pursue our electrification goals, really getting people off of gas and really driving fossil fuels out of our energy supply. I hope that answered your question.
I thought someone else had their hand up. Chuck, did you change your mind?
I'm back. Yeah, sorry. I was actually in Boulder last week fixing my son's solar project on his house. So I wished I would have stopped by, Jonathan, and I would have convinced you to come by and do a feasibility study for us. I'm sure we couldn't steal him away. I have lots of questions. I'm sure we'll have time to catch up with Jonathan later. It's getting late here. I guess the main driver is value contribution. You guys really focused on that. I think that was crucial. You haven't looked at the finish line. You've kind of moved toward the finish line without making changes that were fatal. Keeping the door open, keeping the pressure on. I know the folks at Xcel pretty well. I know that they're changing. I believe our utilities in this state will change. I know one is for sure, maybe not the one we want it to, but I think the pressure piece is what's critical. And I think that through our feasibility study, we can show that we're serious. We can show how we're going to demonstrate to DTE that this is important to all of us, and how do we get on the same bus together if we can, and if we can't, we'll set up strategies on how we can move forward. So thank you for your presentation, very eye-opening for our team, and look forward to future.
Bridget.
Thanks. So I'm not aware that Ann Arbor has a franchise agreement with DTE, does it?
No, for the Foot Act, we have. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
We have a permanent franchise with DTE. And
we can't negotiate our franchise.
That was set up before the Foot Act, so it cannot be, it doesn't end. It's a permanent franchise.
Right. So
we can't negotiate over that.
It seems like we're lacking two very important levers of power that both Franklin Park and Boulder have. So I don't know, Jonathan, if you can speak to how critical that was and what you think not having that lever would do to our situation.
Can I piggyback on that, please? And that is, given we have a permanent franchise with our IOU, and as I understood the analysis model that you showed, it starts with a load analysis. And the question is, if our utility DTE has a permanent franchise with us and does not want to cooperate with us, what is the chance that we will be able to have a realistic feasibility study done with reasonable inputs? What is our leverage to use Bridget's point, to be able to have the key inputs that allow us to have outputs that we can go to City Council and the residents of Ann Arbor and say, with reasonable certainty, plus or minus, you name it, or anybody can name it, 10, 20%, not plus or minus a couple 100%, that this feasibility study is somewhat close to the mark.
Commissioners, fabulous questions. I love these questions. Okay, so to the first one, remember that a franchise agreement is a public rights of way agreement. It is not an agreement that looks at your rates, your reliability, your portfolio. Those communities like Boulder and others that have franchises that are typically renewed every 20 years, it creates an opportunity to negotiate. But I will tell you, very few communities actually take that opportunity or know how to negotiate. I think that is a problem. What a great insight in terms of access to viable data. One of the things that we did up front is, first of all, try to use our regulatory power at the PUC to compel Excel to give us data that was necessary to do our analysis. It is just insane to me that we as communities don't have the information from our utility providers about the basic issues around load, customers, peak, all of the things that are so critical to just understand how we use energy in our communities. We, as cities, we are on the backside trying to implement programs, and we don't even know how effective our programs are if our utility is not giving us the data. So one of the things that we did early on is do a baseline analysis. It was part of that early feasibility, and that was a contracted, I think we spent about $60,000 on that. And it was a pretty hefty analysis looking at all of the parts and pieces of our current energy system. They were able to cull all of the existing publicly available data, being able to tease out information and put together a really strong baseline analysis by which we could kick off our feasibility. So at the same time they were doing that, we were getting information from our utility compelled through Public Utility Commission proceedings. So I just point out that that's a really important piece. Know where you're starting from.
Erica.
I want to continue on this question. I think, Bridget, part of your question was also kind of the leverage, kind of where you're at right now as well in terms of helping to, maybe you don't have that franchise agreement seems to still be on the table in terms of a point of leverage. And so without that, I'm also curious how that might play into kind of stranded costs as you might be thinking about them and projections on that.
I'm not totally getting the connection between the stranded cost and the franchise. And let me just speak a little bit, because stranded cost and going concern get thrown around as these huge specters that will kill any municipalization effort. You saw in that video the Edison Institute playbook to defeat every municipalization attempt. And that is one of the big ones. Like, just throw that out there. That's risk, right? Remember that FERC adopted stranded cost obligation to compensate integrated utilities whose generation assets couldn't be delivered to another paying distribution provider because of the open access requirements to the utilities transmission system. So there are variables that impact the calculation of stranded costs. So revenue stream estimates, competitive market value estimates, length of obligation. You have the ability to influence all of those inputs. And so stranded costs, and as I said earlier, FERC requires the utility to take all steps to eliminate stranded costs. They have to prove that they have done everything to mitigate stranded costs. And they have to prove they can't sell any of that release capacity to other native load customers. So use that to your advantage and understand what the market is of your capacity that would be released. So just something that's really important. In the state of Colorado, I can't speak to Ann Arbor, but I know in Colorado, we have precedent that utilities can't get awarded both stranded cost and going concern. It's got to be one or the other. And so the going concern is just the loss of future profits. And it's very hard for them to just kind of take a number and pick that. So there are some precedent in terms of some of the other types of utilities that exist. I'll just put it that way, not the IOUs, but and it's just not applicable to Xcel Energy as a regulated monopoly. So the franchise, yeah, I mean, of course, Xcel wants to lock up those franchises, but they have, I think, come to the table in a way that we never expected. They want to be good partners. They want to make this work. They actually believe that working, and part of that has to do with new leadership at the company. And it's driven by market for them too. They realize that there is no future in owning and operating coal plants, and they need to figure out how to work more effectively with their communities that now realize have opportunities to move off of the system. So I have to applaud them for that. And they've come to the table in a very sincere and genuine way. And I think that, yeah, the threat of getting back out of our franchise, sure, it's there. Absolutely.
Bridget, did you have another question? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I still don't think that my question about what our leverage is has been answered. Because I'm still seeing that Winter Park and Boulder had points of leverage with franchise, in your case, a franchise agreement ending, and in Winter Park's case, operating agreement that came to an end. And I still don't see a path forward for Ann Arbor without that point, because we would just go to DTE and say, we want our own muni. And they would say, really? Sorry, but you're permanently tied to us.
Commissioner, I now understand your question. I apologize. The leverage is not the franchise. The leverage is losing Boulder as a customer. And I will say we're not a significant or huge amount, but when you look at electricity alone, Xcel is somewhere in the realm of $125 million in revenue just on the electricity. They are also our gas provider. And so looking at the loss of that revenue and profit, that is much more leverage, in my opinion, than the franchise. And you heard Randy say this too, and actually might have been Steve and Paul, the two callers from Boulder, that they saw a domino effect, that as one city leaves and creates the pathway, particularly in Colorado, there were a number of communities that were watching saying, if you can do this, and then there was a pathway through our commission to actually figure out how a city might actually get out of their franchise, because you can get out of your franchise. It's a legal process, but the leverage we had was not the franchise. The leverage was us leaving. The franchise was just the point in time that we started the negotiations. Maybe that didn't fully answer your question, but hopefully a little bit better.
Sure.
I was just going to say, I think in the context of Michigan, to answer Bridget's question too, is we have the permanent franchise agreement, but it is legal to acquire the assets through eminent domain. So I think you're right in that, like, it seems as though we wouldn't be able to do the exact process that both Boulder and Winter Park were trying to go through, but it's legal to acquire it another way. Whether or not that's financially viable, I think is still up on the table and, through the feasibility study. But that's the way.
No question. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner. We absolutely were using eminent domain. We were using our condemnation power granted by our state constitution to acquire that system. And just to give you an idea of our distribution system, our appraisal and the agreed upon essentially was around $150 million, which sounds like a huge amount of money. But as I mentioned earlier, in your debt service, and you amortize that to 20, 30 years, we looked at a number of ways to amortize that. It was in the margins, believe it or not. It was not a high risk variable. The power supply was much more important.
Can I ask real quickly, was that your estimate or was that Xcel's estimate? No, you said Xcel was not to exceed 200 million, right?
Well, that was with a number of other additional costs. That wasn't just acquisition costs. So our appraisal early on was under $100 million. Xcel, of course, I mean, not unexpected, was closer to 200 million. We came a little bit closer, but again, that price Your appraisals are only used to go into your district court where they value the system and say, okay, city, if you're going to acquire these assets using your condemnation power, here's what you got to pay, get out your checkbook.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is, you answer the question is how we deal with this issue of the agreement is part of the feasibility study. So it's going to come down to some sort of a negotiated legal process with a dollar sign attached to it. The feasibility study would determine, but there's no question that the city has legal abilities to use to get the right to move forward, regardless of whether or not they think they have a permanent agreement or not. So that's just a question, or hopefully a very early question that would be answered in any study. Perhaps we could even get that answered before we answer the question of whether or not we have to go to the next step of a feasibility study.
Thanks, Mark. Bridget, another question?
Yeah, and thank you, Jonathan, for answering all these questions. You mentioned that a lot of your leverage came from other communities watching what you were doing very closely, and Xcel fearing that that there would be a domino effect if your muni went through. I'm wondering how actively you worked with those other communities to kind of coordinate this appearance or actual reality of a coalition.
Thanks for the question, Commissioner. Remind me, is this being recorded?
Yes, it is.
I'm kidding. Yeah, I think that was that was absolutely part of our strategy. So I moved through it pretty quickly, but on the slide where I talked about communications, that was such a critical piece because, you know, getting people to get excited about distribution systems is a bit of a challenge. So you have to paint that vision, and that vision is broader than one community. It's how we can create that model, that replicable model, and where that value shows up. It's not just Boulder, but it's every community thinking about changing circumstances in their energy costs, how important it's going to be to maintain a level of service, address the impacts that we are seeing related to climate and the disruptions that we will see to our energy system. And so part of our campaign of sorts was to talk with other communities so they understood why we were doing it. Now, I have to be clear, you know, this was a very contentious issue. We describe this as the biggest decision our community would ever make. And for a lot of the businesses, this represented a huge amount of risk. And for whatever reason, and I have to totally appreciate everyone's perspective, this is our community's decision to make, not the city's, where, you know, they said, oh, we just don't want the city doing this. We don't want them to run our electric utility. We don't trust them. We're trading one monopoly for another monopoly. Sure, we have the PUC, now we have the city council. Businesses, well, I can't imagine that you can run this utility economically and rates are going to increase. All fair concerns, no question. And that's why we continue to do that feasibility and provide as much data out there as possible. That data was always available to every other community, not just in Colorado, but nationally, who have been thinking about this just like yourselves. We said, learn from what we've experienced if you can. We will give you all of our analyses. We will give you all of our models, all of our spreadsheets, all of our documentation, so you can make an informed decision as a community. So yes, that we absolutely worked with those communities. It showed up at the legislature. It showed up at our Public Utilities Commission in terms of continuing to push the utility to be a better utility and be a better partner to their communities that they serve.
Anyone else have a question? Go ahead, Edie.
Just real briefly, Jonathan, thank you again for your time. I know you mentioned that there were a significant number, it sounded like you said more than a dozen working groups. So if you could briefly speak to a little bit of what those working groups covered and what stage they came in, if feasibility study is a little bit too early for that sort of a thing, or if there's a document that you could direct us to that describes this, so we don't have to go into great detail too, but any of those. Thank you.
No, fabulous question. Yes, I would say it's not too early. partially because we wanted to make this about a community decision, not about the city making a decision. So there were, I believe, 14 working groups that we established early on through the feasibility, the early feasibility. So as I showed you that Prezi, that was just a part of a lot of the details are there. All the spreadsheets are linkable in there. And that was to really to understand and unpack things like power supply. Talking about reliability, what are the indices that we ought to be thinking about? What are the best practices in the industry? Thinking about things like the utility of the future. What would be the programs and services that we should be thinking about offering? Our debt service, thinking about the financials and our bonding capacity. And so we had a financial group, a resources group, a communications group. Gosh, I'm struggling now. But we do have a link to all of the reports of those working groups, and many of those were finite. They did their work, and then we would bring them back on occasion to test some of the models. Steve and Paul, who called in earlier, were part of a broader group that was a technical team that was more on really just kind of maintaining a high level of policy, a high level view on how we are thinking about municipalization. And, you know, I just have to come back to the fact that we did make some mistakes. The mistakes were in sequencing, again, going to the commission, thinking about assets. We thought our legal interpretation was that we could serve customers outside city limits, and realizing when the utility threw their weight at it, that there was no way we were going to be able to do that. So we had to redesign our separation plan and take it back to our commission. So understanding that sequence is just so critical because it is real money. And the working groups, I will have to admit, some of them flagged those issues early on. They said, we don't think that your legal interpretation of your attorneys is accurate. And we had to just keep moving forward. So I want to acknowledge and honor them for the work that they put in. It was an extraordinary amount of work. I think we had over 150 volunteers over the totality of the project.
I have a few questions and I'll have others think. So you said 14 community groups from staff resources. How many FTE equivalents were you talking about in staff, more or less on average during this period?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
obviously it varied a lot over time, but I'm thinking opportunity costs too, or just resource planning.
No, fabulous question. And in fact, we had to put out quarterly reports on our budget to our community, and those showed our actual expenses for the project, and then those ancillary costs, which were time of staff who were like our city attorneys, who are doing other things, and the time devoted to this project. What was the value of that? So we could truly value the amount of money that was spent on this project. Yeah. So early on, around 2010, it really was just a couple of staff, myself, assistant city manager, and then we started building up our team. In 2013, I realized that I only know what I know. My background is not in electric utilities nor creating them. So we went out and said, we need to get the brightest minds in this business. So we, at that time, hired an electric utility development director who had run a utility and gone through a process like this. And so then we started to build our teams. And I will say a lot of the expense is not internal. It's, look, our FERC attorneys are expensive. So any of your attorneys working on, and we had a number of FERC filings, again, out of sequence a bit, but we spent a lot of money in DC working on FERC filings. Our legal support at our Public Utilities Commission, again, very expensive. Turns out electrical engineers, distribution system engineers are pretty expensive, helping design a system. I see Chuck shaking his head. Well, maybe the ones that we got.
Chuck's going to do this all pro bono. That's why he's shaking his head. We got that now.
Perfect.
Right? We got it on tape, no less.
So yes, I would say that its greatest, we had probably 2 or 3 city attorneys sharing some of their time. Our team was roughly 6 employees working on this project. And then, of course, our consultants that were there supporting the staff level work.
Thank you. Second question is, as I understood your framing of stranded costs, if in effect there were no stranded costs, that means that Xcel's energy was going to be used by another customer. So I'm thinking in terms of broader equity concerns. DTE is in the process of building, just got approved from the Michigan Public Services Commission, a 1,100,000 megawatt natural gas plant. Ann Arbor says, well, there's going to be no stranded costs. DTE says, okay, we agree, but then they're just going to sell all the electricity from that new natural gas plants and the other ones that they want to build, at least another one, to the rest of the territory. So what did Boulder think it was going to accomplish versus what we think we might accomplish in terms of minimizing stranded costs that we might not have to pay, but then pushing that burden on all of DTE's other customers?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to clarify. And it's an excellent question. It was a consideration that we had too. So the gradual departure approach that I outlined just briefly was to look at Xcel's resource need. And rather than, so what we were hoping to do is the commissioners would grant approval. And so I issued testimony that laid out this. I'm happy to share it with you. It lays out the mechanics of what this would look like. So essentially, rather than Xcel going out and bidding and developing, either extending existing contracts for natural gas or building a new CT, combustion turbine, to meet that load, what we said is we will release capacity commensurate with your requirements, with your load need. So you say, and it's not going to be smooth, right? So it'd be in kind of some stair steps. So they went to the commission and said, we're gonna need 800 megawatts of new capacity by this year. We need roughly 100 megawatts here. We need 80 there. And so we're going to meet that need with a new CT or that gas turbine. We're just going to extend the contract. We said, hey, hold on, you don't need to do that. You can meet those needs with your existing capacity. We will depart. We're going to buy our capacity on the wholesale market from somebody else. So it's a win-win. That was the thought. Now, the downfall of that is that now Xcel is working hard to replace all of their coal generation and their legacy gas with renewables. And so what we want is as much renewables on the system as possible. So yes, releasing our capacity is good, but also it's not replacing the existing fossils with renewables. So that was a bit of the trade-off that we acknowledged.
Okay, two more quick questions, hopefully.
Sure.
You talked about having to do multiple feasibility costs. You heard that there's estimates of a feasibility cost in Ann Arbor of anywhere from 120 to, I heard someone earlier say 175,000, 150, 175,000. Does that seem reasonable for our council member representatives that I think now have dropped off? But I'm just wondering, are we voting on recommending to council to spend roughly $150,000, or realistically, is this going to be something that over a period of years is going to be $300,000, $500,000?
Well, I can only speak from our experience. And I guess if I was answering that question sitting on your commission, I would say this. I would say that you need to do this initial feasibility analysis to understand your options. Will it lead to updating that feasibility analysis? Undoubtedly. But the reality is, I think the bulk of your cost, and to say that range, that seems perfectly reasonable to me. Depends on how you want to go about it. To me, it's really looking at what I said earlier, making sure that you're looking at the value add, really understanding the legal, technical, and financial feasibility components, the legal, really understanding the macro, not just saying, oh, well, you have condemnation power. Well, really understanding what are the possibilities, what is the utility going to do in a response, And that all should be embedded in your feasibility so you understand what you're up against. So I think that range is completely fair and reasonable. Will you need to put more money later on as things change, as costs change? Probably so.
Okay, great. That's helpful. And then simply, if there's anything else, like my question to Randy earlier, how do we get the biggest bang for the resources that we put in, not only the dollars, but staff time and everything else to get a really good feasibility study? Is there a vendor that you would recommend? Is there a playbook that you know of? How do we initiate this process so that we don't say at the end of this, oh shit, we missed X and Y and Z?
Well, I think you're doing one of those things. You're talking to communities that have kind of gone through this, and a vendor, I can share with you, and I'll share it with Missy also, if that's helpful, a number of the vendors that we use for parts and pieces of our feasibility.
Great.
Don't underestimate, you have an extraordinary staff team. I will just say that. You have an extraordinary staff team that is capable of and I shouldn't say this, Missy's going to kill me to say that I'm going to put this on her work plan, but managing parts and pieces of the feasibility. I think when we thought about a playbook, as you asked, there isn't one that we saw that really kind of matched up with what we were trying to understand. So we built it. We did it ourselves. Those parts and pieces are out there. Doing a load model is not hard. Using Homer or a similar software is not hard. Using DPL, which was a software decision tree analysis, or Monte Carlo, not hard. We did hire someone to stitch those together because, again, you needed one model to feed to the next model to the next, so you have an output. That financial analysis, we hired one of our consultants to build that financial tool later on. That was a pretty reasonable cost, I think roughly $25,000. And that was a very, very robust tool. So I think you start to build some momentum and consultants will want to participate. They'll want to work on this project.
Thank you. I'm done. Bridget and Mark.
Yeah, you mentioned that, sorry, my brain is turning into mush. You mentioned that one of the ingredients for getting Excel to get to the concessions that you wanted was that they had a change in leadership towards more progressive, I guess, upper management. And I'm curious if you can comment as to whether that happened as a result of this pressure that Boulder placed on the company, or if it was something just organically happening at that company that coincidentally helped with this negotiation.
I'll try to make this quick. I think it's both. I think there is a macro and a micro. The macro, of course, are the global stressors on utilities. We all know that. We don't need to get into that. The market that is really driving those utilities that are vertically integrated to really rethink their business model. How are they going to remain solvent in this? I mean, if we look back 5 years, just think this. It's just mind blowing as I think about this, how rapidly the energy system has changed in the last 5 years, much less 10 years. It is extraordinary. So yes, those macro pressures in terms of regulation and policy and public pressure, no doubt has shifted the utility. We're seeing this in every utility start to think about, how do we pivot? Xcel is doing it, and now we've seen other utilities in Colorado saying, oh gosh, well, we got to get to 100%. So how quickly can we do it? How do we get out of these legacy assets, our coal units and our gas units? How do we do that? How do we become more nimble? The micro, I can point you to public statements by the company who have said Boulder has driven them to be a better company. And I take great pride in that. I think our community takes great pride in that. Many people believe we were absolutely nuts to think about municipalization. The amount of money that we spent, I will just tell you, over the duration, this is going to be a shocking number. We spent around $20 million. It sounds like a huge amount of money over a decade. But I have to reflect back to the question that I posed at the beginning, which was it worth it? I believe yes. because we have had that impact on our utility, which has such an impact on the state, has an impact on all of the states in which that utility functions. So I have to believe that every dollar was leveraged in a way that really drives innovation and addressing this global crisis that we are all facing.
Jonathan, was those out-of-pocket costs or also your FTE costs?
Those were both.
Both, good.
Both.
Art, Bridget, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Michigan has 40 municipal utilities and a fairly robust Michigan Municipal Electric Utility Association. My question is this: does Colorado have an association, and were they any help to you at all in this?
Yes and yes. The help, I'll just put it this way. So our municipal utility association in Colorado, you get the entire state is going through a transition and has, and I think we've come out the other side largely driven by very, very progressive elected leadership at the state level. We have been predominantly a fossil fuel based state. A lot of oil and gas exploration, a lot of coal. That has changed dramatically in the past decade. The reason that I raise that is that our association, it was not really equipped to help us think about municipalization for the purposes that we were looking to municipalize. So in terms of the mechanics, in terms of how to operate a utility, giving us thoughts on how to set up a utility and operate it, looking at our reserves, how we would have spending and operating reserves, how we would have some of the other issues around our open access transmission tariff, setting that up. They were extremely helpful. They helped connect us to resources. APPA was extremely helpful. And then just reaching out to existing authorities on this. Jefferson County PUD, Austin Energy, lots and lots of smart people to help us kind of test, are we doing the right thing? Can you break our model? Get in there and break it, because if it's wrong, we need to know that it's wrong. So we actually hired a firm out of North Carolina with that intent. And we as staff did not. We asked our city manager to hire them. We didn't want to be involved. We turned it all over to them and said, tell us the fatal flaws and tell us that we're idiots. That's fine, we're okay. And in the video I showed you, the one person that mentioned that, who said that we had a third-party verifier, Sam Weaver, he's actually now our mayor. So he was a firm believer in public power, and that was a platform he ran on.
Excellent. Well, Jonathan, thanks again so much for spending your evening with us. It's another evening where you've missed your dinner with your significant others, and I'm sure it's one of many, but we really appreciate it very much. And if we're ever out in Boulder, then one of us will take you out for a beer or more.
I would love it. I applaud all of you for doing this hard work. You're doing it the right way. I will just conclude by saying it will be hard. And no matter the outcome, it will be worth it. Whether you choose as a community to municipalize, it creates a level of literacy that is so important for your community to understand the choices and where you need to go next. So just so grateful for the work that you're doing there. We're all in this together. Anything I can do to be helpful, please let me know.
Great. Well, certainly speaking for me, and I think for all of us, this was incredibly helpful. Both your and Randy's presentations. Thanks very much again.
And
Missy,
by the way,
closing comments from your side?
John, by the way, Lone Pine Brewery out on Boulder is a pretty fine establishment.
We have a lot of them.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Missy, any closing comments from your side?
Just a huge thank you for everything you do. And we often say in our office, we're about 10 years behind Boulder, but I look forward to catching up with you soon. In both ways, both cordially and in our clean energy goal.
Great. Good night, Jonathan. So we have hopefully just a few wrap-up portions of our agenda. The next point is OSI report and news from commissioners. Missy, we'll start with you.
Rapid review here. Wanted to share our rooftop solar initiative is moving forward really well. For those who saw, a recommendation went to council to use some of the American Rescue Plan funding to make the investment in that system. It's just over 4 megawatts of rooftop solar at city facilities. Recurring savings then would go into various funds and be able to unlock resources to do things like invest in the equity office and the resources we want in the community. But that's sustained funding that we'll have unlocked, which is really exciting. So there's an opportunity to share your comments on that project and how we're investing the ARP funding more broadly. So excited to see that move forward. The landfill solar project and RFP was released a week ago last Friday. Things are looking good. We had a meeting with bidders last week. Tomorrow I'll be out at the landfill doing a site walkthrough with interested bidders. And so far the interest far exceeds what I thought we would see, which is demonstration of how much the industry has moved broadly. And just as a reminder, that's up to roughly 20 megawatt system that we would be installing at the former CAP landfill site. Also wanted to share.
Before you leave that topic, there was, I'll call it an email discussion that was precipitated by, I think, a question from Bridget about the landfill solar. And there was a number of back and forth. I want to remind everyone that we're not supposed to be doing that via email. We're supposed to be doing that in a public forum in meetings like this. I'm just wondering if there's maybe a very short recap for everyone on that in terms of question and the ultimate, or questions and the ultimate answers. If can you?
Yeah, forgive me. It's been a long day, and so I'm trying to recollect the specific details. Basic narrative about the community solar aspects. So the FAQ that we wrote was before we'd intervened in the VGP case, and so my team is updating that as we speak. We'll have an updated FAQ for the public, because what we negotiated in one was the right to turn that into the first community solar offering in DTE's territory. So that means that you would subscribe through My Green Power, but it'll be the landfill solar project. It won't be a bundle. You will pick this project. When you subscribe, you would pay a premium like you would, and that premium, I actually shouldn't say you'll pay a premium. I don't know what the cost will be. We will find out from the bids. You will pay a levelized cost of energy, which is the cost for your portion of that project. But you also get a credit because that energy is sold on the market because you're not actually taking it, right? So you will get a credit on your bill that's commensurate with the amount that you've invested. So that's how that project will work. So it'll be somewhat similar to a rooftop system where you get to use that energy in that system, and that's basically your credit that you get on your bill. So it's a little, it's different, but it is, I'm sorry, my words are a little loose this evening. That's the way the mechanism would work. And what we're doing right now in the bids, when people are submitting, is they're going to give us the cost to build. So we'll get the levelized cost of energy. We'll be able to come and do the calculations. We know what actually it'll cost to invest. And then the credit will depend on the market. That will actually fluctuate over time. Yeah. So that project is moving. And again, I'm sorry not to be on camera a lot of the night. If I lose you all, I'll be back shortly.
I think that covered it. Bridget,
okay,
did that cover it too? Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Continue, Missy.
Very quickly, wanted to share, in addition, we did submit comments to the Michigan Public Service Commission on case U-20147, which was an uncontested case. And it's about how the utilities can recover costs. So wanted to share for folk that, of course, our strategy is all things. So yes, we're collaborating, but we also continue to intervene in regulatory cases. We most likely will be intervening in an energy efficiency case that's about to be dropped by the utility as well. So just want to share that that's on our plate, and we've been working on prepping for that case in the office. And then benchmarking had its first read. Thank you all for your support of that. First read through council. Second read will be on Monday night. If council passes that on Monday night, we will have a benchmarking ordinance for the community. So that's exciting to see. And then the time of marketing, we're just updating that right now, and we'll be bringing that back to you in November for consideration, a little bit more fleshed out. Possibly December, if we have a session, we're working on some clarification language on that. Those are the main highlights.
Commissioners, updates, news from commissioners. Getting past everybody's bedtime. Chuck and Matt, Mark, go ahead.
See, who's going to run the programs, these benchmarking, time of marketing type programs within your staff? Is there somebody you've assigned, and is there going to be bandwidth for them to do that?
Yeah, in our current work plan, so we've got, Thea has been setting up the structure for the benchmarking, working with community services who will help with enforcement. Although we don't, enforcement isn't the goal, right? Compliance is the goal and the objective. So we've been working with the 2030 district, and we've actually set aside interns to help physically do any input that businesses may need for that particular program. And then time of marketing parallel. But in that model, the goal is actually to do the trainings. So Zach Wass-Smith on our team has that. And the objective is to do regular recurring trainings on how people would actually complete that assessment. That would just be standard that folks can come to. We work with the realtors, et cetera. So that's part of the work plan that we built for the team. Thanks.
Mark.
Just a quick comment. I think congratulations is in order. So give me just a second. In 2016, Chairman Mirsky and I wrote a report memo to City Council and the Mayor recommending that the city create an Office of Sustainability and hire a senior level person to staff that at the director assistant administration level. The city subsequently did that, hired Missy as the manager of that office, and as of last week, Missy has been promoted from manager to director. And so I personally want to congratulate her, and I think that this group of our council, having started this process, should be quite proud of what we created and how it's going. So congratulations, Missy. Job well done.
Thanks, Mark. I do also want to just call out that we also hit the 2 megawatt mark with the Solarize program. And I know Julie's online and will hate when I say that I'm pushing her hard for the 3 megawatt mark. So in 18 months of operationalizing that program, for adoption curve is beautiful.
Behind a great manager is also a great staff. Great. Any other news or updates? I have one quick comment. I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but proposal A is on the ballot. And I would just like to point out that, proposal A would allow the city to make decisions, not just based on dollars and cents. And with that, it enables the city, for example, to look at what are the sustainability aspects of a proposal from a vendor and what kinds of things cannot be quantified in dollars and cents. And so I would encourage you to think about that and engage with other people as to the pros and cons of that proposition. But I think in the framework of the work that we do and the kinds of things that we want, I would think that there are cases where we want to look at the qualifications of a vendor, what kind of sustainability features they're offering, and so on and so forth. So I'll just make that plug, if you will. Then our next point is working group updates and report from the Environmental Commission. So I guess maybe we start first with Carlene and transportation electrification, if there's anything of significance.
At this time, there's nothing of significance to report, John.
Okay, that's good. That's what I thought. And Edie, anything to report from the Environmental Commission? By the way, thank you for taking that role on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Last month's meeting focused a lot on the water department and the opportunity to either rehabilitate or connect to regional water supply, and then zero waste and a municipal recycling facility, but nothing of particular connection to energy at this time.
Great. So we are back to public input. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 937-6751-6819. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that raise their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone call. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated message that the host is allowing you to speak. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller ending in 341.
Hi, my name is Ann, and I'm calling from the Westport Hill subdivision in Ann Arbor on Morningside Drive. And I'm calling to express my support for municipal electrical energy utility in the city of Ann Arbor. For 12 years, I lived in a town with a municipal electrical utility, and as a consumer, I enjoyed my rate of no more than $50 a month to provide electricity for a 3-floor townhouse, and I never in 12 years lost power. Thank you.
Thanks for calling in.
Caller ending in 861.
Eight six one. Go
Can you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Yeah, good evening again. This is Sam Copy from the Second Ward. I want to thank the two presenters for all that information. I learned a lot. The one question I have, and possibly this can be put in the feasibility study that's being discussed, but maybe it would be too much, is whether broadband could be included. And I think that would, having a municipal electric and a municipal broadband service would be great for the city of Ann Arbor. And at this point, I'm 100% for a feasibility study. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks for hanging with us throughout the whole presentation and the whole evening. Anyone else?
Caller ending in 245.
Caller 245.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we do. Yes.
Okay. Good evening, EC Chair John Murphy, and Energy Commissioners and OSI Director, Dr. Missy Stoltz. I am Kathleen Murphy at 315 Linda Vista Street, 48103, Ward 5. This has been an extremely interesting discussion here tonight. I'm so glad we had it. I support the goals of Ann Arbor for Public Power, but I always learn from hearing other perspectives. The topic of where our energy comes from, especially as we face a growing climate crisis, is engaging our whole country and the whole world. We all have a lot to learn about things most of us knew nothing about as we consider our path forward. We learn from the excellent speakers we heard here tonight. While I support Ann Arbor for Public Power, I also tremendously admire the work of the Office of Sustainability and Innovation, its director, Dr. Missy Stoltz, and the A20 team. They've taken on a huge task and are moving ahead quickly. The main thing I take issue with is the role of DTE in the A20 plan. It seems like DTE will never be able to reach A20's goal of carbon neutrality and 100% use of renewable energy by 2030. DTE's heavy dependence on fossil fuels gets in the way of A20's ambitious goals. And in general, and at the same time, the UN's recently released climate report says we are dangerously close to not being able to stop global warming. We only have a small window to effect change. We need to stop using fossil fuels now. So this could be our opportunity to do something about this. Our own community-owned utility would give us the possibility of controlling how our muni works, and has the goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030. Ann Arbor is a very special community, known for being a very progressive community. Many residents are very concerned about the climate crisis, as well as the unreliability of DTE. I think we could be a leader in the state if we successfully build our own electric utility, which is why we need a feasibility study to see if this would be possible. And again, thank you for this whole presentation this evening. It's been a tremendous learning experience. Thank you.
We thank you.
That's it, Chair Murphy.
Great. Okay. Items for the next agenda. We already heard from Missy that either next meeting or the following meeting, we will have a presentation on the sister side of the benchmarking and disclosure ordinance that's going through council right now on the commercial side. That would be for single family residences. And Missy, I guess we'll talk in the coming weeks as to whether that'll fit in. What other agenda items? It looks like Missy, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to see if the commission would be interested, based on the presentation we had in March from Paul Fenn and Attorney Brader. Staff saw a third option in terms of municipal power called a sustainable energy utility, and we would like to present. We'd like to present what we learned and what we think is there, and get the commission's feedback on that. So, if possible, I'd love to have some space in the November meeting to be able to share that.
Makes sense to me. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, Missy, I've looked into this as well, Delaware's SEU, and studied that a bit. So I'd like to weigh in on that too if I get a chance.
Yeah, I'm wondering what people think about dedicating the whole meeting to the topic of municipalization, other than the possible addition of the single family residential benchmarking. It's not really benchmarking, but the home energy score audit requirement that we talked about a couple of months ago. What do people think about that idea? And then taking up the resolution and trying to bring this to a close, so that in the November, or at the very latest our December meeting, we can take a vote.
And then we'll also have an update from the A2Zero Education Work Group. A few minutes for that too.
Yeah.
Right, John?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, there's a potential resolution that we
Okay.
introduce.
All right.
Robert, go ahead.
I support spending the entire meeting on Missy's proposal and the broader conversation around municipalization, so that in December we can. I've heard from many members of the public that they want us to wrap this up this year. I think we've collected enough information. I think that we have not really had a deliberative meeting to this point for us as a body. In addition to Missy's proposal, ideally, I think it would be better if we could push the benchmarking conversation off of November's meeting and push it to December or January to focus solely on this issue.
I'll just add on that. I'm game for that, unless there's time sensitivity, in which case that's when we would bring it to the body for consideration, if that's acceptable. So game to push unless legal informs us we're ready to go. And in that case, council does really like seeing the Energy Commission to weigh in on energy policy. That's possible.
I'm game for that too. I just want people to realize that every month that we delay that, there's a month's worth of sales where we will not be getting home energy audit scores and that information passed on to buyers. So we need to think about that. On the other hand, this is typically a slow time of year too. So go ahead, Bridget and Mark.
Yeah, that plan sounds good to me. I think focusing on the municipal utility question is a good use of our time, but I was also wondering about finance. I don't know if this body can speak to that, or Missy, if you and your staff can, as far as the cost of a feasibility study and what budget would come out of. Would it come out of yours? Or is that something that we just put in the hands of the council if we recommend it? But I would be interested in like a bigger picture finance.
Chair Murski, if it's okay, maybe I could suggest that commissioners just send me questions and copy you that you want to make sure we discuss, so we can curate an agenda and make sure to come as prepared as possible. So I'll note that one down, but others that folks want to.
So I addressed that question to some degree, Bridget. I encourage people to look at the questions that other people submitted about what the costs are, what budget, what the opportunity cost might be. So look at those questions. It's under question 1 and to some degree question 2. And if there's something that you want Missy to address in the next meeting, please submit something to Missy and to me that augments what's already on that list. Mark and then Chuck. and then Ember.
John, mine is just a procedural concern. We are committed to sending the city council a recommendation or a resolution in December of some sort. The way that we're currently organized, that means that resolution has to be proposed in November at our next meeting. I think given the amount of stuff that we're dealing with here and I think the sustainable energy utility that Missy's talking about could engender some significant discussion in the November meeting as well. So I guess I'm suggesting that we waive that procedural requirement, that we don't have to make a resolution and vote on it at the next meeting, so that we can actually propose the resolution, discuss it, and make a decision at our December meeting. And that gives us, more time to focus on these things. I think we want to do it right. Either that, or we ask the city commission for a longer period of time before we are forced to make a recommendation. Let's not let a clock decide the quality of what we're doing here.
So correct my memory. I think we already had a first reading of a resolution, did we not?
We did. We haven't had one for a sustainable energy utility. Also, just to clarify, council asked us to come back. We are not required to come back by December. So if the body as a whole would choose to ask for more time, that is completely in the purview of the body. That said, I think we acknowledge that there's a lot of desire for this to be ready.
Yeah.
All right. Well, given that, then I guess I'm not as concerned. So
yeah. So I think we
I'll
have
withdraw
a
my
resolution. There could be friendly amendments to it,
Right.
but I think we don't have to now have a first reading in November and a final vote in December. We could potentially have a final vote next month, or at the very latest in December, without the risks that you described that we would
I'll
go
withdraw
over
my
next year, unless we say, in light of what we hear in November and December, it's an absolute must that we take another month.
Right.
I hope that's not the case.
I'll withdraw my concern. Thank you.
Great. Chuck, Ember.
Speaking from the age of experience of being on this commission for quite a while, why don't we do a workshop? I think it would be worthwhile for this group. This group should meet on its own, auspices to talk about this particular topic, because we've heard a lot of information. We've never had a debate about it. I don't think it violates the Open Meetings Act to have a meeting as a commission, like a workshop setting, where we just talk about this particular item, and that'll educate us all. We'll get focused on what we're going to get done. We'll have a resolution coming out of it that then can be timely. And I think I would be able to work a free evening to do that at some point in time, or a Saturday for a couple hours like we used to. I think it's worthwhile to get together and kick this around.
I agree.
That would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
I don't think so.
The body cannot meet and deliberate outside of public.
I'm not saying we're not deliberating though, Missy. We're educating. It's a matter of understanding the issues.
I am 99.9% sure that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act, but I will confirm with our legal department.
Okay,
That's my understanding as well. But we'll take it under advisement, and we'll check, and we'll get back with the group.
Is it a violation if it's a public meeting?
No, it's a violation, but we can't do, if it's a work session, we can't do business. We can deliberate. So we couldn't come out with a resolution. It would have to be public. So folks, we would have to have public comment. That could happen. We could definitely have a work session, but us off camera meeting and talking, nope. I will check with legal.
Well, I think we could do a work session offline. It's a separate meeting just to discuss the issue. We're not voting on anything. We're not taking any actions.
But
We'll talk about it. I mean, this is different than typical work sessions that we have before, where we talk about what is the work going to be of the year, how are we going to structure it, are we going to use an action item tracker, things like that. This is actually deliberating the pros and cons, the merits, the hows of a feasibility study, and I think Missy's right, but we'll check into it. Missy's already committed to do that. Ember, go ahead.
I feel like what I was going to say has changed many times since Mark and Chuck's comments, and my brain is not functioning. But yeah, I mean, I think I generally would recommend that we don't push this past December, because I think we've been talking about this literally for a year at this point. And so I think, we need thoughtful consideration, but as Robert said, it's time to have a conversation about it and then put this up to a vote. And I think we really need to stop delaying it. We did have a first reading already. So I think it's worthwhile to talk about this again next time. And I think we could bring it to the table again in November, so that we can at least start having those conversations around amendments if it's not able to be brought to a vote in November. But I think we should take a look at it again and have a conversation while looking at it, while we have that deliberation next month, so we don't keep kicking it
Right.
down.
Could you send that resolution around again, John?
Yeah, we'll
Send the resolution around again.
It's, I believe it was introduced
In August?
as a
July?
formal document, and so it should be on Legistar, and we'll send the link to that.
Okay, thank you.
I think it was the July meeting.
I think it was August because we
Oh,
didn't
maybe
meet in
it's
September. So we introduced it and then we didn't meet and then we had, oh,
Right.
I'm sorry. No, you were right. It's July and then we didn't meet in August.
Right.
That's what it was.
And then
It was
September.
July, we didn't meet in August.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Robert, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that, more of a grand and all-encompassing statement that we are doing everything on this subject as above bar without any questions of any sort of illegality or violations of any act, because if we go down this path, and the path that we go down, everything that we do now from a procedural standpoint can come forward. So I want to make sure that we're doing this as thoroughly as possible. To that point, I just want to make sure for the resolution that we are following that timeline. It sounds like, we've had that introduced, we've had it a proper reading. As long as we are good with having amendments to it in November, then it still looks like we can have that December vote. That's just the biggest thing in making sure, and obviously I know Missy will do a lot of the homework on this as well as Chairman Minsky, but just for re-emphasizing of that, because everything that we do now is really, in effect, could come back to bite us if we do not follow procedure. And
Yeah. Thank you. Good point. Excellent.
I fully support that. As chair, that's my objective, to be fully transparent on this and to reach a decision as quickly as we possibly can. We have clear, I'll say, direction from council that they would like a decision as soon as possible, ideally by the end of the year. And we've heard also throughout the entire year input of residents that they feel that we need to accelerate this process. So I will do my best working together with Carlene and Missy to shepherd that through. Obviously, we will take stock of that in our November meeting. And if we think we need more time and we reach sort of a unanimity on that, then we'll go into December and if need be in January. But my goal is no later than December. Missy.
Just a reminder to commissioners, when that resolution gets circulated, you cannot comment. Okay, we can't deliberate back and forth on that. So if you have proposed amendments, please send them to me and I'll compile them for the whole body, okay?
Excellent point.
Outstanding. Great.
Missy, can you, I'll make myself a reminder. Maybe I'll get with you and Carlene and send out an email to that effect. That can go with a link to the July Legistar where the resolution is posted.
Just add that I think it would be helpful to do that now between this meeting in November while it's like fresh in our minds.
Absolutely.
So if you could send that around, and if we could send amendments to Missy before November, and then have the amendments people have suggested to this as part of our discussion in November, I think that would be helpful.
The next point was adjournment, but I see Travis joined us again. Travis, is there anything burning that you want to share with us before we drop our heads on our desks?
I may actually, I know that you were hoping to get a bit of an update, and I may actually yield to my colleague, Erica, because I know that she's been putting a little bit more of the hard work into a resolution on the embodied carbon building materials. And so, Erica, I don't know if you want to speak more to
that. Just that we appreciate the resolution that got passed by Energy Commission on embodied carbon. We've been trying to, I've had conversations with Chair Mirsky since then about maybe some changes to some of the resolved clauses that might make it a little bit more actionable for the city staff. But now it is potentially a pretty large lift for city staff, and so we need to understand what the implications are and what the get feedback from a lot of different units right now. So that's kind of where it's at in the process right now, and just making sure, obviously, there are so many things that we want to do as a city. And I think we just need to make sure that we are moving forward with the highest impact ones right now, to make sure. And so that's also just another piece of the conversation that we need to make sure in terms of timelines and different things like that. But hopefully we'll have some feedback soon.
Mark?
Damn, sorry. Councilperson Briggs, Mark,
you just froze on us.
can you hear me?
You just froze on us for about 10 seconds.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We heard you address Councilmember Briggs, and then after that froze. You're back though.
Okay, I'll talk. Tell me if you can't hear me. The disruption in supply chains has brought the issue of solar materials to the forefront, and along with that has come a discussion about embedded carbon in solar panels. And I'm wondering if this is an appropriate place to add this issue of embedded carbon in solar panels. Essentially, it comes down to using coal and mostly coal to manufacture solar panels in China means that the embedded carbon return on investment for a solar panel goes out to 40 years, and the life of a solar panel is 20 years, and its financial return on investment is 7 to 10 years. So the issue of embedded carbon, if we're going to be spending dollars on solar, that taking ultra low carbon modules makes sense. So
I just want to jump in on that and say, I think that there might, I know GLRA had a presentation on this. I'd like to circulate it to folks, Mark, because my understanding is slightly different than what you just said from that. So maybe we should circle up, but good point about embodied carbon in kind of all of our thinking.
And whether this resolution is a place to raise that or not.
Yeah, this resolution is more for the built environment, meaning, concrete, steel, carpet, so on and so forth. But it's a good point. It's something we might want to talk about later in terms of buying Chinese panels versus American panels versus whatever.
Right, or just carbon, picking up embedded carbon in solar panels and making that a factor in the decision when we spend tax dollars to support them. Thank you.
Good point. So we are ready for adjournment. Does anybody have any parting words for the rest of the commission? If not, then my parting words are thank you very much for your dedication tonight, and thanks for all the great discussion and the pre-work that people put in. Thanks, and have a great rest of your evening, even if that's just hitting the hay right after this. I hope you sleep well. Good night, everybody.